Good afternoon. The time is 5:30 p.m. on Wednesday, December 19th, 2018, and this public meeting of the District of Columbia State Board of Education is now called to order. The roll will now be called to determine the presence of a quorum. Mr. Haywood, please call the roll.
Ms. Williams.
Here.
Mr. Jacobson.
Present.
Ms. MacLeay.
Present.
Ms. Wilson Phelan.
Present.
Ms. Wattenberg. Present. Dr. O'Leary. Dr. O'Leary. Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones. Mr. Weedon.
Present.
Mr. Batchelor. Mr. Batchelor. Ms. Alicia. Ms. Alicia. Ms. Robinson. Ms. Robinson. Madam President, you have quorum.
A quorum has been determined, and the State Board will now proceed with the business portion of the meeting. Members, we have a draft agenda before us. Are there any corrections or additions? Seeing no changes, I entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
The motion being properly moved and seconded, I will ask for all those who are in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? The motion is approved. Members, we have the minutes of our December 5th working session before us. Are there any corrections or additions to the minutes? Seeing no changes, I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes. Is there a second?
Second.
The motion being properly moved and seconded, I will ask for members to approve. Yay, say yay if they approve.
Aye.
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 Although who did, all opposed? Seeing no one opposed, the motion is approved. Good evening. My name is Karen Williams, Ward 7 Representative and President of the State Board of Education. On behalf of the members of the District of Columbia State Board of Education, I want to welcome our guests and our viewing public to our Wednesday, December 19th public meeting. The State Board typically holds its regularly scheduled meetings on the third Wednesday of every month here at the Old Council Chambers at 441 4th Street Northwest. In addition to broadcast this meeting by way of the District Knowledge Network, we are also live streaming by way of Periscope on Twitter, and the video for the meeting will be posted on our YouTube page once the meeting concludes. Tonight's agenda includes the presentation of a ceremonial resolutions to two outstanding educators, Kelly Harper, the DC Teacher of the Year, and Rachel Tomel Leo, a Meakin Educator Award winner. I want to welcome them and their guests to our meeting tonight. Thank you for all you do on behalf of the students of the District of Columbia. We are also recognizing the service and dedication of three of our members whose terms are ending: Laura Wilson Phelan, Mark Jones, and Joe Weedon. Each of these members have added a unique perspective to the work of the State Board and have served their constituents with distinction. We are also joined tonight by local and national experts on family engagement, including our Chief Student Advocate, Faith Gibson Hubbard. I want to thank each of you for being here, and Faith in particular for working with the State Board of Education staff to ensure a productive discussion tonight. Did you hear me, Faith? I just saw you walk in. Okay. Before we begin public testimony, I want to update the public on two items of importance. First, related to our work on the teacher and principal retention task force that we had earlier this week, an online survey that has published using information from our November 28th public forum was completed. I want to thank the public for their strong participation in both the forum and the survey. We had over 450 unique views of the survey combined with nearly 150 form registrants, and they have provided strong input that the staff will work on over the holidays to refine into recommendations for the State Board to consider in January. Excuse me. Second, the new DC school report card was released to the public on December 7th, 2018. The release was not perfect, and I want to thank the superintendent and her team for acting quickly to correct issues and establish a method for further updates. Nonetheless, the school report card is a wonderful step forward for the district residents. It provides data that previously was spread across multiple websites and agencies are completely inaccessible to the public. The report card is designed as an information portal, including the ratings of schools according to the STAR framework. Neither the stars nor the report card are a measure of a school quality, however. Schools are much more than a single metric or test, as many students or educators can tell you. We must all look beyond the STAR framework, including high school growth and access to opportunity. We will continue to involve the public in the process, and we are grateful especially from the members of our ESSA task force for their commitment and service. Additional information about the task force can be found at sboe.dc.gov/ESSA. Unfortunately, the state superintendent could not be here tonight. She is ill. I actually talked to her. She sounds worse than I do, so if I know how I feel. If she sounds worse, I know she must be sick. But she did send in her remarks, which will be read by our Executive Director, John Paul Haywood.
State Board of Education Public Session Superintendent Remarks. Thank you, President Williams. I would like to provide some remarks on tonight's agenda item regarding family partnership in district education. Without question, our schools and educational institutions must ground decisions in parent perspective and voice. Family engagement is vital to increasing student achievement and ensuring that schools are supportive places where children learn and grow. Schools and our education agencies can all improve our efforts to include parents in decision-making and ensure that parents have the information and support that they need. I believe that our collaborative work on the DC School Report Card serves as a vital case study for soliciting, empowering, and responding to parent voice. I think it illustrates some practices that we have found promising. Historically, school report cards have not been built in partnership with the people who will use them most, parents and families. And this time, OSSE wanted to make sure we were working with the community to create a tool that allowed transparent access to data. Between September 2017 and August 2018, we heard more than 4,000 responses from parents and families, school leaders, and community members to determine what data to include in the DC School Report Card and how to make the report card as user-friendly as possible. Throughout the process, we have remained committed to serving the needs of students and families to ultimately provide them with easy access to easy-to-understand data that both addresses their needs and also meets the federal requirements mandated by ESSA. I believe that our DC School Report Card, which was released on December 7th, meets that mark. By leveraging community organizations and the SBOE's ESSA task force, OSSE developed a toolkit that could be used to facilitate discussions on the report card in their own organizations and communities. This toolkit helps support more robust conversations with a wider audience of parents. We also worked to ensure that we were transparent with the feedback that we received by releasing summary reports that detailed the feedback that we heard and how we were responsive to it. This is a model that demonstrated promise, and we hope to continue employing it in the future. I also believe that the DC School Report Card will support parent and family engagement in schools and within government. Parents and families will be able to learn more about their current school quickly and easily on an interactive, user-friendly website, which will help families engage more deeply with their child's school, or to help families who are choosing a school to determine the best fit for their child. With a wide range of inputs from teacher qualifications to after-school programs and activities, the DC School Report Card will be the best first step for families learning more about educational options for students across the district. I must also note that it was this body and the ESSA task force that pushed us to include information on parent organizations on the report card along with parent communications policies. This was a wise addition. The DC School Report Card gives families a better understanding of where we are succeeding as a city and where our schools need additional support. It helps us understand how we can continue to champion the needs of students regardless of their needs or background. I am proud of the partnership that OSSE and the State Board of Education have had on creating and implementing the DC School Report Card. We are seeing strong utilization numbers. Already since December, we have had over 20,000 visitors to our site. This body was instrumental in shaping the content, design, delivery, and functionality of the DC School Report Card, and we are appreciative of your partnership and feedback, and we are excited to better meet families' needs through our partnership. In closing, I am proud of the work that OSSE and the State Board of Education have done over the past 2 years, have done together over the past 2 years. I am particularly grateful to the work of outgoing members Laura Wilson Phelan from Ward 1, Mark Jones from Ward 5, and Joe Weedon from Ward 6. Each of you have served your respective constituencies well, and I am glad that you have engaged in this difficult yet impactful work of improving education in the District of Columbia. Also, I welcome Fraser O'Leary from Ward 4 to the SBOE this evening. I look forward to continuing our partnership with the remaining and new board members new members of the board next year. Thank you.
Thank you, John Paul. The State Board welcomes public participation and activities under our authority. At every public meeting, we begin with testimony from public witnesses on education-related matters. Your comments will become part of our official record. If you are a member of the public and would like to speak at a future public meeting, please contact our staff by email at sboe@dc.gov or by calling 202-741-0888. Tonight, we have 9 public witnesses. Many of our witnesses have provided written comments for the record. They will be available on our website. We have 2 panels of witnesses. As I call your name, please come forward to the table. Our first panel will be Laura Fuchs, teacher, Woodson High School. Lisa Burkett, parent, Duke Ellington School of the Arts. George Smith, parent, George Ellington School of the Arts. And Linda Woodland, grandparent, Duke Ellington School of the Arts.
Madam President, I should also note that Ms. Woodland will be reading the testimony of Ms. Pumphrey as well.
Ms. Humphrey? Okay. Thank you. Welcome. You have 3 minutes to speak this evening. Please note that you must use your microphone, else we won't be able to hear you. Your microphones is on, and you do not need to move it towards you. The light on the table will be, but you do need to push the button before you speak. The green light, the light on the table will be green for the first 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes, and then turn yellow for the last 30 seconds. You will turn, and then will turn red when your 3 minutes are over. We will begin on your left, my right, which means Laura, Ms. Fuchs, I'm sorry. You come every month, so, you know, we have this special relationship, right? Plus you're in my ward. Please begin when you are ready.
All right. Is it on? Okay, so I'm here to talk today about how my school and all the other ones are more than a score and urge the community at large to look beyond the stars. OSSE's current report card and the SBOE's approval of its content has created a system that creates winners and losers and sets up schools to fail. It is toxic, it encourages bad behavior amongst adults, and it prioritizes what is easy over what is right. And if those who work in offices downtown and seek to make policy and report cards about our schools could from time to time remember, those of us working in schools are human beings serving other human beings and not problems or deficiencies, maybe we wouldn't be where we are now. At HD Woodson, my students write papers, my students engage in analyzing primary source texts, my students read countless news stories, my students engage in debates and simulations, my students have met with Supreme Court justices, my students argue their own cases in front of the Federal Appeals Court, my students have gone to the White House, my students have gone to Congress and lobbied for statehood, my students participate in legislative council sessions through the DC Youth in Government program. My students compete and win the We the People Constitution team against schools with higher star ratings. My students have met with community, civil rights, and civil activists, from the humble to the famous. My students keep in touch when they go to college. My students go on to become political science majors. My students come back, and many go to work in government, some even as teachers, police, fire, octo, and in the executive office in their own communities. My students run up and hug me when they see me. My students are often way too silly and comfortable talking around me. My students know they can come to me for a couple dollars for food if they need it, or that if I don't have it, I'll give them food out of my own lunchbox. My students know that I'll give them money for tuition or books if it comes down to it. My students know I'm not the only one in my school who will do this. My students know they can come and talk to me if they're having a tough time. My students know I will drive them to and from school if it means they are getting there on time and are safe. My students know that many of their teachers come early, stay late, and put up with the endless BS in order to be their teachers. My students know that they struggle with reading and they don't always want to practice. My students know that math teachers are hard to find. My students know that their test scores are not where they want them to be. My students know that our city is not done right by them. My students know that the politicians in this city have platitudes and not much else. My students know that the educational leaders they meet aren't really listening to them. My students know that most of the politicians and so-called leaders are judging them. My students know that they are seen as a photo op, a press conference, and an opportunity to build one's name by those who claim to be working in their best interests. Sometimes I'm not sure if my students know they're worthy of more from their government. Sometimes I'm not sure if my students know they're more than a test score and attendance metric. And sometimes I'm not sure if my students know how amazing they are. We need to do more for our students, and it's getting tiring coming here and having to repeat that and nothing happening.
Madam President, if it's all right, I'll speak next. Madam President and Board of Education members, my name is Greg Smith. My daughter is a student at Duke Ellington School of the Arts, but I am also a D.C. attorney. While my own family was never accused of residency fraud, I am the lawyer who filed 2 TRO motions in May to stop OSSI from precipitously declaring up to 220 Ellington families fraudsters with related financial penalties. Since then, I've also represented several Ellington families wrongly accused by OSSI of residency fraud. 5 of those families of the accused parents are here today, 2 on this panel and 3 on the next. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. I cannot possibly convey to you in the 3 minutes allowed the larger story of what happened, but I do hope there may be an opportunity for follow-up questions and answers. I will say briefly that what OSSI did here was shocking, and its actions are unbecoming of the D.C. government. Problems with this investigation were obvious early on, but rather than being open to working with us or the school to try to fix them, OSSI too often simply doubled down and bowled ahead, seemingly more interested in PR than in fairness or the truth. OSSI's own rules and regulations were ignored, and citizens' rights were violated. Scores of innocents were wrongly accused, and worse still, OSSI went after some of our society's most vulnerable, and also, I believe, put Ellington itself at risk. We know now from OSSI's own recent admissions that some 2/3 of Ellington's families it accused have already now been declared D.C. residents, a number that is likely to only grow larger. How does a government agency accuse hundreds of people of fraud and get it wrong more than half the time, especially when the cardinal sin in residency fraud investigations is for a D.C. resident to be wrongly accused? Why? Because that family can't attend D.C. schools, and they can't attend any other jurisdiction schools either because they're actually a D.C. resident. That should never, ever happen. Yet it did happen here. One of my clients, for example, who was Ellington's best male dancer and a rising senior, was literally escorted off campus in August and then essentially left stateless at home and kept out of school for 2 months, missing his SAT. And beyond Ellington also back in May apparently closed 111 other cases against families at other schools, even though those residency fraud investigations were surely flawed as well. This board should wonder what happened to those other 111 students. The D.C. Code makes clear an agency's methods must facilitate rather than hinder enrollment of eligible students, but that broader mandate was abandoned by OSSI, with simple common sense and even basic decency at times ignored. Hundreds of Ellington families were unfairly maligned, and the school's vital reputation was badly damaged by Aussie. Hopefully, during a broader Q&A session, I can explain some of the specifics, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak this evening.
Hello, my name is Lisa Burkett. I also am an Ellington parent. For what it's worth, I live across the street, literally, from the school. I was accused of residency fraud. This accusation could have destroyed my 30-year federal career. I've been extremely disappointed in Aussie's performance since enrolling my son at Ellington. We started as a non-resident family and had to practically beat down the door to demand to pay tuition. Then, when my son and I moved into the district, I followed every rule related to his application and documentation of residency, but I was still accused of fraud with absolutely no evidence against me. The burden of proof was put on the families, on me, so we were deemed guilty and had to prove that we were innocent. In the end, the actual harm to me was minimal because I was deemed innocent. Beyond my righteous indignation, it was more of a hassle, waste of time, and Greg's time, and annoyance than anything else. But I'm absolutely outraged at the impact on other families and on the school as a whole. Without the great support by the entire Ellington family, many very innocent families would have been deemed guilty without due process. This scandal has also hurt the school's essential fundraising efforts, since the school is not completely funded by DCPS. I find it interesting that Aussie roared like a lion when accusing us. There were headlines, over 200 Ellington families guilty of fraud. And now Aussie squeaks like a mouse when announcing how absolutely wrong they were. On this particular report card, I give Aussie a failing grade.
Good evening. My name is Lucinda Woodland, and I am the grandparent and legal guardian to an 11th grade student at Duke Ellington School of the Arts. I am also one of the people to receive letters from Aussie and the Office of the Attorney General declaring my granddaughter to be a non-resident of the District of Columbia. My neighbor, who is also a grandparent of a student of Duke Ellington, informed me that she received this notification regarding her granddaughter's residency status. Upon checking my mailbox, I found that I also received the same letter. I was shocked and bewildered, as was she. I've had legal custody of my granddaughter since infancy. I have always submitted these legal documents to DCPS prior to the start of every school year, from her enrollment in preschool to this current school year. My husband and I love and consciously support public school education. The process of proving residency to Aussie and Office of the Attorney General was humiliating, especially in light of the fact that the reason for this finding was never included in the threatening letters that were sent. It was if we were guilty until proven innocent to what was unknown. My neighbor and that I speak of is over 80 years old and has had legal custody of her granddaughter from a very young age. We spent what I consider to be wasted time attending hearings and providing documents repeatedly, still never knowing why it was declared that we were not residents of DC. The students, teachers, and administrators of Duke Ellington work very hard every day, striving towards excellence in both academics and arts. The attack on the morality and principles of this institution by the media and poll of public opinion was so undeserved. The love and attention that is shown by every adult employed at that school to each and every student is immeasurable. The students were afraid of this unknown that filled every corridor of the building. I hope that the love displayed every day will facilitate the healing process and what I consider to be a witch hunt. After several passing weeks, I received a letter in the mail stating that I was, in fact, a resident of DC. I have still to this day not been provided the reason for being declared a non-resident by Aussie and Office of the Attorney General. If there was any question, as obviously there was by either or both of these agencies, Transparency and communication, I feel, would have cleared up any concern in a matter of a day.
The second testimony as well.
You want me to read the second letter? Okay. This letter is from Maria Thompson Pumphrey, a parent at Duke Ellington School of the Arts. I am a proud resident of the District of Columbia and the parent of Sanaya Cherry, who is a sophomore at Duke Ellington School of the Arts. I, along with many members of my family, have lived in D.C. off and on all my life. I own a home in Prince George's County that was purchased for my son-in-law in 2008 and later in 2013 would be used as an investment property by myself and my in-laws that now my parents reside at after several not-so-good tenants. I moved back to the district in 2015 to be closer to my terminally ill sister, which at that time I had enrolled my child into private school because I had missed the deadline for the lottery. I have paid taxes to the District of Columbia since 2015 until present. My daughter did not attend a DC public school, but a DC private school before she was enrolled into Duke Ellington. She received a full scholarship to 3 different Catholic high schools due to her academic excellence, but her #1 choice was to attend Duke Ellington for their dance program, which for her was a dream come true. After many prayer and advice from the community, educators, and alumni, reluctantly but hopeful, I obliged. I did everything I was asked to do during enrollment period, at least I thought. I feel if there were any discrepancies with any of the documents requested during my enrollment, which I supplied copies of my pay stub to show I am a DC taxpayer, then someone should have said something. September of 2016, my sister, whom I resided with during the enrollment process, lost everything due to a fire at her apartment building. We were forced to stay in a hotel for over a month until after housing was found. During this time, my sister was receiving her second round of chemotherapy and physical therapy, which left her unable to work full-time. The decision was made that I would live with my sister permanently to relieve the financial burden until she was strong enough to work full-time. Well, full-time never came. My sister passed away in February of 2018. During this personal strain of my family, I still had a child of my own to stay strong and appear to be happy, so she was not discouraged about the next chapter of her high school. I didn't know that owning a home in another state where I only paid property tax would mean that I'm not a resident of the District of Columbia or warrant an investigation with notification to contact the Attorney General's office with no options of mediation or request for a hearing before Mr. Smith got involved. I sent several notifications asking for a hearing to explain my situation for each letter that I have received. I also sent in additional documentation at that time I thought would be sufficient to prove my residency. At that time, I hadn't heard anything from OSSI. Later to find out that their correspondence was going to an address I had not resided in over a year. During this same time, my parents, who reside at the Maryland address, had informed me when they went to walk their dog on several occasions, they found investigators outside their home to see if I lived there. They saw this as harassment, when I had already requested a formal hearing to supply whatever was needed to show additional proof of residency. I was willing and able to do so. I would like to add that I had re-enrolled my child for next school year, as everyone was advised to do by June 1st, 2018, but still had many questions to include where does this leave us. I attended the hearing on June 6th at D.C. Superior Court with the judge advised OSSI to provide another formal communication regarding their reasons, which mine was a residence that I did not use during my enrollment process. At that time, an email was created by OSSI for those parents who requested hearings and additional documents was accepted at that time. This has been extremely stressful for my child, not knowing if she will be able to attend school in the fall or knowing what other options did we have. After many queries, I finally received an email reply from OSSI on September 12th confirming that we had been cleared on August 3rd and a letter sent by OSSI again to the wrong address, though my paperwork submitted with proof of residency clearly noted that OSSI was using the wrong address and I had asked them to correct their records. Best regards.
Thank you all for testifying. Do we have board member questions? Ashley?
Thank you all for being here to testify tonight, and thank you for your public comments. For the Duke Ellington parents, guardians, and council, I especially sympathize, and my sympathies go out to your situation. Listening to your testimony, I've heard about your situations, but I haven't heard about potential solutions. Obviously, DC residency fraud is a serious situation, and it does take away resources from DC students and DC taxpayers. What would, in your opinion, be proactive measures that we could help to change the system, and proactive measures the board could take to ensure that non-residents are not taking advantage of the system, and so this situation doesn't happen again? Do you have any suggestions?
If I may, if it's a question as to any individual family's residency or whatever, I think that if they had just called each person down with whatever concern they had to address that at that moment and ask for any supporting documents at that time, it would have been cleared up without having to go through just throwing out a net and gathering 200 names or so, and then just going by the process of elimination like that.
I think that's a good start. I think it's sort of basic. You don't accuse people of fraud before you even have talked to them, and that's what happened here. If I might, if the board would entertain it, I would like to sort of walk you through this process so you can see how really deeply flawed this process was, if the board would allow that. All right, as I understand the process, DCPS and not OSSI used to have responsibility for investigating residency fraud at DCPS schools, including Ellington. OSSI had oversights, it signed off on the audits, and it was definitely responsible for reporting residency fraud claims to the Attorney General. But DCPS led the residency fraud investigation at its own DCPS schools. Prior to last year, Ellington had no reason to believe that its residency fraud claims controls were deficient. During each of the 5 previous years, Ellington's residency audits have been clean. Its audits had been all signed off by DC officials, and it had received 100% of its funding that was tied to verified residency from OSSI during the previous 5 years. But then things apparently changed. The mayor delegated to OSSI her responsibilities in this area, apparently with the DC Council's encouragement, and OSSI in the spring of 2017 drafted new regulation that gave itself new powers to perform residency fraud investigations, even at DCPS schools. Now, while that change may have been encouraged by some in DC Council who may have felt that DCPS was not doing enough, it's not entirely clear that OSSI even had that authority, because the statutes never changed, and OSSI's statutory powers don't even include an express power to investigate. But they stepped in, they started investigating, and everything changed. As Ellington moved into 2017-18, many parents naturally just submitted the same residency documents or similar residency documents to what they had submitted before, never expecting any problems. But OSSI was now treating them differently. In January of this year, OSSI issued a report stating that it had flagged 74 Ellington students during its audits as deficient. Most of those were discovered to have been rejected for hyper-technical reasons, like they submitted a power bill that preceded rather than post-dated the payment, so it wasn't necessarily confirming the payment. Ellington then timely appealed all but 19 of those 17, and even as to those 19, it provided additional information later, and Ellington asked OSSI to approve all but 2 of those people as DC residents. So the audit appeal process itself may give you an idea of how things changed and how rigid things became. As I understand it, in past years, whenever there was an audit that had questioned families, the school was given a week to correct the problems. But now, OSSI announced there was an online portal that the school had to submit all its corrections in, and all within a 24-hour period. So now, and OSSI wouldn't even tell the schools when the 24-hour period was supposed to begin. They didn't know what day it would begin. So if the administrators showed up at 8 o'clock, they may have missed 8 hours of their 24-hour window already. But it was like, it became this game where Ellington now, instead of having a handful of questions, they had 74 questioned people, and they had to submit all their documentation within 24 hours to this portal that they didn't even know when it was going to open up. They put an extra staff member on call so that it could enter all the corrective materials into this portal furiously before the time expired. It did that, as I said, as to all but 19, but it gives you a sense on how rigid everything had become. And around this same time, Ellington went through its normal audition process because it needed to think about next year. And it did it knowing that there may be 2, maybe as many as 19 that they needed to replace because they were at risk. But in fact, OSSI had made a decision to investigate not just the 74, but to investigate everyone at the school. Everyone, because they said the audits flagging meant that every single Ellington student, every single one, regardless of suspicion, was now needing to be investigated. Around that same time, Duke Ellington founder and patron Peggy Cooper Cafritz died. Not long after that, in early March, the website DC Urban Moms reports that a DC council member wrote to the OSSI superintendent. That council member noted that Ellington's residency fraud investigation that had been announced with the audit having some problems might be a good time to consider splitting up Duke Ellington's campus and bringing back a resurrected Western high school. The next month, in April, a long-anticipated Inspector General report was issued. That Inspector General report had been tasked before to look into residency fraud at DC schools. And what that report said was that it was critical of OSSI, because OSSI in the past had examined 67 cases and had not reported them to the Attorney General or even to DCPS for enforcement. So OSSI, they said, was not doing an adequate job enforcing residency fraud. So now let's fast forward to the key date, May 11th of 2018. Coincidentally, that's the day that the big OSSI report comes out. Coincidentally, it's the same day that Mayor Muriel Bowser is scheduled to be interviewed on the Kojo Nandi show. One can certainly imagine that on that show, as the person responsible for appointing OSSI's superintendent, Mayor Bowser was likely to be asked about this Inspector General's report, which criticized OSSI. But that never happened. Why? Because that very morning that she appeared, OSSI issued its report on residency investigation at Duke Ellington School of the Arts. Note that it's not just a report on residency investigation. OSSI specifically named Ellington, and the Kojo show was all about, instead of talking about OSSI's flaws, it morphed into how Duke Ellington was the poster child for residency fraud in DC. OSSI's May report was released with much fanfare, a lion, with press ready to drop stories.
Excuse me, Mr. Smith, can you?
Press were already ready to drop stories that morning, but Ellington administrators had been told next to nothing about this report that was coming out. They first learned of it that morning. They weren't even given a copy of it. They were told that they were never given a chance to respond to it. The report came out that morning, and they'd never even seen it.
Okay, so can you tell us specifically and succinctly what we can do?
Well, what you would suggest, potential solutions, so this doesn't happen again in the future.
Well, I think there's a question as to whether OSSI even has the proper investigative power to be doing this at DCPS. Yes. And but I do think that at a minimum, what we need to do going forward is to not accuse people, and especially hundreds of people at a school. I mean, 40%. I guess I know there's limited time here, but I really do want to convey how devastating this was to the school. 40% of the school was suddenly at risk, some of the most vulnerable people in our society. And the school itself, with if they had lost 40% of their funding, the school was under. That thought of bringing back Western High School, you know, fits in neatly with the idea of Ellington not being able to survive to hit on 40% of its students. And the administrators couldn't fight back because how are they going to challenge OSSI as it's like biting the hand that feeds them. They're dependent on funding. The reason we're here as parents is because the school couldn't really even fight back against OSSI. We had to run to court twice to keep people from having their rights thrown out and being thrown out of the school. This was weeks before graduation. Seniors were worried they weren't even going to graduate. This would have been devastating to Duke Ellington.
Madam
Duke
President.
Ellington's
Madam President, maybe we could move to more Q&A with board members and make sure that the next panel has an opportunity to speak as well.
Yeah. Q&A. Yes, Mr. Batchelor.
Thank you, Madam President. First, very quickly, Ms. Fuchs, thank you for coming and I think telling the story of your students that really is beyond, I think, what we see in our current star rating. I think my colleagues and I worked very hard to ensure that we brought the star rating closer to the ideal of residents that we heard from across the city say, I think, some of the same things that you did. And while I think the board was able to bring it closer, I think many of us agree that it hasn't gone far enough. And my hope is that as we work with OSSI to improve it over the next months and year, that we begin to have some of those critical conversations, especially as those unintended consequences of our current framework, I think, become more apparent in the months to come. So thank you. Very quickly, Mr. Smith, one, thank you for your parent advocacy and for using your skills and profession to also advocate on behalf of other parents. Just a few quick questions for you. Can you give me the number one more time again of total investigations at Duke Ellington?
The number of the total investigation?
Yes.
All of the students.
200 something. What was that?
All of the students, every single student, as we understand it, was investigated, even if their paperwork was in order. And let me just briefly say, you know, not only when you're investigating that people that don't have reasonable suspicion creates legal issues, but it's a little creepy too, because part of residency fraud investigation sometimes can include an adult investigator following a kid home from school to their house. And it's just kind of creepy. It shouldn't be done. It may be legally proper, but I mean, it's not something that should just be done willy-nilly. It should be done carefully. But the total numbers are, the entire school, every family was investigated. 156 were told, you have been deemed non-residents and will be, and are not eligible to come back to Ellington next year, and another 56 were told they were still under investigation. So the total of those was 220 that were at risk. And
appreciate it. Yeah, that was the number I was looking for. But to that point, many of you have testified that when you got your letters, there was no reason for, at least listed in the declaration, for any of the parents you helped, Mr. Smith, was any reason provided to them why they were flagged?
Initially, there were 2 letters sent. We got TROs where they withdrew both of those letters. Finally, at the time of the 3rd letter, they did provide their investigative summary. That was in July, so that was 2 months later, basically. And at that point, when we finally saw the summary and we were given due process, that's when the cases started falling apart, because the investigative summary showed that there were either flaws or they were just technical issues that could quickly be corrected.
Very quickly, just kind of some of the top reasons that some of those summaries listed.
Sometimes people had not submitted, like I said, I mean, maybe Lisa can help with this more than me.
Yeah. In some cases, you know, you heard that there was a property in Maryland.
Ms. Burkett, make sure to use the mic, please. Sorry.
Split family, some.
I moved from Virginia, so they were using my Virginia address that I had moved out of a year prior, even though everything came from the school to my home across the street. I mean, honestly, I wish the investigators had followed my son home. Might have solved this a little quicker. So those were some of the reasons. Also, I know some of the other things that we heard was adoption papers or guardianship papers weren't in order or hadn't been submitted recently.
Yeah.
I mean, those don't change that often, so people don't necessarily submit them every year. But the wrong address thing was horrible because I didn't get my letter. And that first letter said that I had 10 days to respond. I assumed that I might be on that list that was never provided because I had been asked 3 times during the school year to provide additional documentation. And in the end, it was the exact same documentation that they finally used to deem me innocent. So I assumed I was on the list. I got a number to call at the AG. They said, no, call Aussie. And they said, yes, we have your letter. And I asked, well, where did you send it? And they sent it to my Virginia address. And I said, well, the school sends everything to my DC address. Could you send it there, please? And then they did. But that letter did not say why, any reason at all.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. My time's up. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here, and particularly to the Ellington families, thank you all for coming out this evening. I'm incredibly disappointed that the superintendent is not here to hear your testimony this evening, nor is her chief of staff, who I've spoken to about this on multiple occasions, and I hope her team, who is here, brings that back to her and that I want to have additional conversations with her. To me, this is just another attack on the arts here in DC. We are not providing sufficient elementary arts education. We are certainly not providing enough middle school arts education, and we have a beacon of light for the arts in Ellington. I'm a student of the art. I'm a classically trained pianist and vocalist, and it breaks my heart when these families and these children who have struggled and these youth have an opportunity for something great, and the system does not work on their behalf. That's a big problem for me. My time is very limited. I've got 2 minutes left. Mr. Smith, what lessons do you hope that OSSI learned from its actions here through this process?
Well, I think that what Ellington wants is, and we as parents want, is 4 things. Number 1, an end to the public scapegoating of Ellington, period. Number 2, an end to the targeting of Ellington families. OSSI should terminate its rule that every single student at Ellington somehow needs to be specially reviewed for the next 5 years. And also, its late-hour demands that Ellington staff immediately escort students off campus without giving them a chance to be heard first. Number 3, a renewed commitment to working collaboratively with the school's administration. Ellington, over and over in this process, was kept in the dark. We still don't even have a list. We don't, and the school doesn't, of the people that they declared non-residents. Can you believe that? Since May, they declared 220 people. We still, and the school still, doesn't know who those people are. They're not working with the school. They're keeping the school in the dark. They issued this report before telling them it was about to come out. That just should never happen. They need to work collaboratively with the school instead of imposing some sort of corrective action plan on the school from the top down. And finally, they need to support Ellington and the arts generally. Mr. Jacobson, I appreciate what you're saying. This is a great school. This ought to be something all of you take incredible pride in. But this is a vulnerable population, and what this school does for that vulnerable population is remarkable. We are asking for your help because we need it. The school and its arts are underfunded, and we appreciate your willingness to hear us out today and to continue to make this school what it's been for the last 50 years and to fulfill Peggy Cooper Cafritz's dream, which is a remarkable, wonderful dream.
Thank you. Mr. Jones?
Thank you, Madam President. It's regrettable that you all had to experience such a terrible time with verifying your residency. Duke Ellington holds a special place in my heart. Many of my colleagues know that I ran Peggy Cooper Cafritz's first campaign to be president of the school board and continued to work with her after that. But I went through this with you because I have 9 families that I was working with. that experienced this. And I must tell you, one of those families was a very dear friend of mine, and his granddaughter attends the school. And the information was just coming back, and at one point, I even questioned him and said, well, does your daughter really live in the city? And it almost ruined our friendship. But it was terrible because they could verify everything. And so I don't understand the Gestapo tactics, quite frankly. But there is a serious message here for the board. It would be easy for me not to say anything. This is my last meeting. But I can't do that. This board set up the residency requirements for the city and for our schools. But this is also an example and a message to this board going forward that this is why this board needs the authority to implement policy itself, irrespective of OSSI. This board needs that. There are a number of instances where this board could step in and make changes. Even when we make mistakes, we can change policy. So I hope this board is listening, and I hope with the new board that's coming in and our remaining members that you take that into consideration. It is so very important. It is an element of authority that this body needs to help our student bodies and our families. But I do have a question, Mr. Smith, and I'm sorry I'm out of most of my time, but what happened to the 110 students?
Well, there are 111 at other schools, and look, I jumped into this in less than 2 weeks, and I'd never done any educational law ever, and we had to get to a TRO in 2 weeks. I filed the TRO on behalf of the Ellington folks, but I didn't file it on behalf of the other 111. My assumption is they were all disenrolled based on evidence similarly probably as flawed as the Ellington students, and I don't know what happened to those other students. They weren't Ellington people, they were outside of my charge, but if those investigations were as flawed as the Ellington investigations, one can assume that probably 2/3 of them were innocent as well, and we don't know what happened to them.
May I add one additional point on what OSSI could take away from this and what the board could help with? During my career, I've worked for 2 different federal investigative agencies, and I am absolutely appalled at the poor level of investigation and the evidence that was presented finally in the final letter that came. You know, a public records report showing I lived in Virginia. Well, yep, I did, and I paid tuition when I lived there, but now I live in DC, and that's on the same report, by the way. And I had a copy of the same report run, and it showed my current address as well. So the level of, I don't know who conducted the investigation and what their training is, but it needs to improve. I mean, that's just, the level was egregiously bad. Excuse me. That is something that needs to be corrected. If you're going to go out and investigate, you must have a standard. You must.
Thank you. Joe?
I want to thank you all for being here tonight. Residency fraud has long been a concern in Ward 6. It's something that I'm proud of the work that the board's done over the last couple of years, tightening the regulations. I think what we've seen here is, as my colleague from Ward 5 just stated, the gap between policy and implementation. The board does not have the authority to set what types of documentation we use to prove residency. That power is housed with the council. OSSI does the investigations. The council needs to provide oversight there. We need to look at the power structures in the city and how we streamline those to ensure that the policy choices we make are helping our students, not hindering our students. The one question that I want to ask, it was brought up the success of Ellington, working with different families and different students from different backgrounds. I just want you to put on the record, what are Ellington's graduation rates, its attendance rates, its college-going rates? I think that's an important thing to talk about and ensure that everyone understands this is a highly successful school that's doing great work.
I think I'll defer to it's a great question. I think I'll defer to the second panel. We have some folks from the Ellington Fund coming, but I think you'll see that the rates are quite remarkable, particularly for a school that has, what, 60% school lunches. The graduation rates are something you all should be very proud of.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you very much. Now we'll call up the second. Yeah. We have 3 minutes. Okay, would Yumika Ramos, Winston Clark, Sandy Logan, and Ari Fitzgerald please come forward?
And Madam President, as this panel assembles, I just want to make clear that Mr. Fitzgerald and I had a professional relationship. I work at his firm, so I will recuse myself from questioning Mr. Fitzgerald directly.
Okay. As with the previous panel, you have 3 minutes to speak. We'll start from my left. You start.
Hello, my name is Ramos. My daughter Alicia Fonseca enrolled as a student at Duke Ellington School of the Arts, September 2017, and is still a student there. Despite having signed a valid 18-month lease for an apartment at 16 Quincy Place Northeast on November 19, 2016, and moving there permanently in February of 2016, we were accused by Aussie of residency fraud and have spent months laboring under the fear and uncertainty of this investigation. Thankfully, with the assistance of counsel, we were cleared of fraud, and our case was dismissed on December 11, 2018. But no other family should go through what we went through. Aussie has based its legal conclusions solely on the outcome of a LexisNexis search, and has consistently interpreted the evidence to find evidence of fraud even when it has been presented evidence of valid DC residence. And this is no way to run an investigation. I work for a DC agency as a supervisory of quality control examiner in an office that oversees investigations. For us, a LexisNexis search is the starting place that can reveal potential evidence of fraud that might justify starting an investigation, but cannot be used to draw legal conclusion. As our case reveals, Aussie apparently considered LexisNexis as the end of the story. Even after we submitted additional evidence, including our lease and a water bill, Aussie determined that those documents were fraudulent without taking any actual investigative steps. For instance, the realtor who negotiated our lease made a mistake on the end date of the lease and changed it by hand, placing his initials by the correction. Aussie came to the legal conclusion that that lease was fraudulent without ever picking up the phone to call the realtor. Nor did its investigators visit our home despite my explicit invitation to do so. Likewise, DC Water had spelled my name wrong on the water bill, which Aussie also interpreted as evidence of fraud. An agency looking to find the truth would have done more investigation, but Aussie found what it wanted to find and essentially refused to look at any other evidence. Sorry. Were my records perfect? No. I had made a mistake in filing my withholding paperwork, which led to a complicated tax situation, one that I finally rectified. But Aussie seemed intended on criminalizing my mistakes rather than in conducting an actual investigation. And this is not how investigations are supposed to work. As a result, I invested countless hours into these false allegations made about my household, including having to console the anxieties those allegations created on my child, who was already dealing pressures between academics and the arts of a new school. No other family should be put through this. It was very unfair to be put through, and I hope that Aussie accepts the responsibility for rectifying and restoring the damage they erroneously caused to my integrity as well as the integrity of Duke Ellington.
And I'm not Sandy Logan. I'm Tia Powell Harris, CEO at Duke Ellington School of the Arts, filling slot number 4. Tia Powell Harris. Prior to last year, Duke Ellington School of the Arts passed its sample residency audits at 100%. This year's 100% review of all 540 students resulted in only one problematic family. We have always been, and remain committed to, working diligently in concert with DCPS and OSSI to ensure that the residency documentation provided by our families is compliant with all district regulations. Between the 6 months of March and October of 2017, 2 things occurred simultaneously. One, OSSI was given responsibility for residency verification for DCPS. New regulations were passed. OSSI released new guidelines and trained staff, but not families. In August and September, before the October audit was deployed using new procedures and criteria. And 2, Ellington experienced its own transitions as we spent our last weeks of summer and our first months of school resolving all of the issues that came with the return into a completely reconfigured and renovated space just weeks before the school year began, which I must admit we did rather well. We also put in place the first permanent school leadership after 3 years in a transitional space and adopted a new leadership model, which combines the efforts of a CEO and a principal. The audit and investigation has taken a toll, a major toll, on the entire Duke Ellington community. Families who are marginalized or find support through extended family networks, including multi-generational homes or one parent in the M or the V of the DMV, feel particularly targeted. Starting in the first week of this school year, students who did not know that they were under investigation were traumatically pulled from the school in front of classmates until additional residency documentation was produced. Some missed a day, some missed a month, most missed a week. Now, this board knows better than most the devastating impact of missing school and the particular importance of successful school startup. Without academic testing for admission, Duke Ellington has students from all 8 wards. Many of the investigated families came from wards 7 and 8. The school is succeeding in raising test scores. It's closing the achievement gap. It has a 100% graduation rate, a 98% college acceptance rate, and most recently, we received a 4-star rating in the new report card system. Now remember, only 5 DCPS high schools received 4 or 5 stars. Supporters need to know and believe in this work and not have its success tainted with accusations of school wrongdoing and fraud. But most importantly, students need to be made to feel safe at school and supported by their school community. In closing, I say the impact of this investigation cannot be ignored. Thank
you. On behalf of the Ellington, my name is Ari Fitzgerald. I'm president of the Ellington Fund, which is the nonprofit organization that raises private funds to support the Duke Ellington School of the Arts. On behalf of the Ellington Fund, I want to thank you, Madam President, and your colleagues on the District of Columbia State Board of Education for the opportunity to provide remarks regarding the negative impact of OSSI's residency fraud investigation on school fundraising. The funding Duke Ellington receives from the District of Columbia is woefully inadequate to pay the cost of operating the school, and the gap between what it costs to run the school and what DCPS provides has widened every year since 2007. Despite numerous requests for DCPS to address this problem, no significant additional funding has been provided. As a result, the Ellington Fund, which was established for the limited purpose of raising supplemental funds for instruments, costumes, field trips, and musical and artistic competitions not likely to be provided by DCPS, now struggles to raise funds to pay teacher salaries. This severe funding gap makes it essential that the Ellington Fund raise a significant amount of money each year from private donors. However, our ability to raise private funds was dramatically impacted this year negatively by the OSSI investigation. In numerous instances after news broke of the OSSI investigation on the front page of the Washington Post, above the fold, and in local news media following a press conference in the D.C. Mayor's office, longtime donors reached out to inform us that they would not be contributing this year because of the findings in the May OSSI report. In one example, our main contact at a longtime funder, the Harmon Foundation, wrote the following to the Ellington Fund's Chief Development Officer. In light of the reports about admission of non-tuition paying non-DC residents to Ellington, I don't think it's a good idea for me to recommend a grant to the Harmon Foundation board. I would need to explain what has happened for those who don't live locally, and I suspect the response would be that if tuition were collected from non-residents, the school would easily be able to pay for its own shepherding program. I'd like to see the resolution of this issue before I consider another grant. Sorry. In another example, we were asked by our largest donor, the Eugene Casey Foundation, to meet with its lawyers at the law firm of Williams & Connolly and explain why the endowment it funded to support vocal and instrumental music at Duke Ellington should not be rescinded. If that endowment, whose income pays the salaries of about 10 teachers at the school, DCPS does not pay the cost of operating the school, had been rescinded, I believe the school would have been forced to close. Thankfully, once we explained the actual facts on the ground and the glaring flaws in OSSI's investigation, we were informed by the Casey Foundation that they would stick with us. This investigation has caused also a complete halt in the plan DCPS had developed with us over the previous 18 months to address the longstanding DC funding gap I mentioned earlier. DCPS had finally acknowledged the funding gap in the fall of 2017 and committed to addressing it through a new contract and funding model. The DSAP board, which runs the school, agreed with DCPS on the terms of this new contract and pledged to present that proposal to the DC City Council for approval. DCPS's efforts in support of the new contract and funding model, which are essential to Duke Ellington's long-term survival, were abruptly halted when the OSSI investigation broke and still have not resumed to this day. As someone who appreciates Duke Ellington's unique role as a Washington, D.C. cultural institution, I ask that you help ensure that this OSSI madness stops and that OSSI is never again allowed to go off the rails in a Kafkaesque witch hunt against Duke Ellington or any other public school in D.C. I also ask that you do what you can to ensure that Duke Ellington's good name and reputation are restored so that we can get on with the business of repairing its private donor base and updating the DCPS funding model. And finally, I reiterate what the Washington Post has thoughtfully requested, that the District of Columbia publicly apologize to the school, its students, and its parents for the severe damage OSSI's investigation has caused to the school. In June of this year, every member of Duke Ellington's senior class graduated on time. This compares to a citywide average of about 68%. 98% of those students are now attending an institution of higher learning. This despite the fact that Duke Ellington does not have any academic standards for admission. A large number of its students enter 9th grade reading or performing math, well below grade level. More than half of its students qualify for free or reduced lunch, and most come from the 3 poorest wards in the city. A few months ago, the First Lady of France, Brigitte Macron, spent 3 hours at Ellington trying to figure out how to replicate Ellington in Paris. That is something we should all be extremely proud of. We owe every Duke Ellington faculty member, staff member, student, and parent a debt of gratitude for putting up with this ridiculous and unfair situation. And I urge you all to do everything in your power to fix it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Clark, are you?
Yes, yes. I also wrote pretty much what everybody else has written, so I won't reiterate those. What I will go over is some things that I didn't write down, so you could get a feel for my personal situation. We were one of the first families named in the lawsuit when the investigation came out, and I'll use that word very loosely because I found the investigation to be somewhat humorous at best and equally as annoying. The first time I got a letter, I said, okay, I'm not a DC resident. Why are you sending it to my DC home? You obviously you're not expecting me to reply, but I replied, and I gave them every single piece of document that legitimized me to be a DC resident. I have a valid DC license. I gave them 3 years. I could have gone back 5 or 10 years of tax returns. I've gave them, I worked for Care First Blue Cross Blue Shield in the city, Southwest. I gave them pay stubs to show that I pay DC taxes. I have 4 cars registered in my name in DC. What else do you need to say that I am a DC resident? My son is in the 11th grade. He's a proud Duke Ellington student. My wife is an alumni of Duke Ellington. He absolutely loves going to the school. So we tried our best to just keep it, amongst the parents. You worry about school, we'll worry about this ridiculous letter. So I was fairly certain, once I sent you all of this information, it was done. There's no way in the world you're going to come back and say you're not a DC resident. So the second time I got the letter, I said, okay, something's wrong here. There's 2 words for you. There's a process improvement process that I think needs to be implemented, and then there's communication, okay? So I said, okay, let's deal with the communication. So I picked up the phone and I called, and I got someone that said, okay, yeah, my name's on the letter, but I have to take a message, and the right person will get back to you once we figure out what's really going on. So in the midst of this, my son comes home and he says, Dad, I think I was being followed. Okay, I don't know where you live, but in my neighborhood where I'm from, if you get followed, usually bad things happen. Okay. Secondly, the news, Channel 5 came to my house and they said, is this where you live? I said, yes, this is where I live. They put me on the news. I for certain thought it was done at that point. Okay, obviously I'm not gonna go to somebody else's house and cook dinner, okay, day in and day out. So to me, it was, like I said, it was humorous, but it was also annoying. And we finally did get a letter after all of that that said, you know what, you're cleared, you are a DC resident. But I'll tell you 2 things that happened after that. One, they said that my documentation was fraudulent. It appeared fraudulent. I have no idea what that means, because if you look at my DMV records, everything goes back to DC. They also said that they found that I lived in Mitchellville, Maryland. My parents live in Mitchellville, Maryland. I have not lived with my parents since 1986 when I graduated high school. Okay, they also said that my driver's license was invalid. I moved from DC and I went to Georgia. I lived in Atlanta from 1993 to 2005. I came back to DC for a job opportunity. I have not had a DC driver's license ever in my life until 2005. So I don't know what other driver's license they could have picked up. The database is out of date. Obviously it's not worth anything for investigation. And really, if they did investigate me and did come to my home or followed my son, they could have just knocked on the door. So I'll end with that.
Thank you. Board members, questions?
So thank you very much for coming to speak Again, I'm going to reiterate my question that I posed to the last panel. We all know that DC residency fraud is a serious problem, but obviously what happened in your situation, there was a snowball effect that led to a myriad of other problems with the school because of many different steps that were taken inappropriately in this particular situation. What are some potential solutions and/or proactive measures we, the board, and/or OSSI can take to ensure that this doesn't happen again, but that we are still enforcing our residency fraud protections and measures to make sure our DC students are getting the resources that are needed for them, and that our DC taxpayers are being given the appropriate resources?
One thing that I like to add to that is, you know, in my profession, I like to tell my folks, we go after low-hanging fruit, things that we can grab at very quickly to get through the mud. Okay, I think that some sort of process the process needs to be revisited. It must be outdated. It has to go through several, you know, revisions, and then take a look at, okay, now that we have a new process, how quickly can we move through those things that we know are true? So if you have a valid if someone has a valid DC license, okay, let's put that to the side. Something else might pop up that has a red flag. Let's put that in another basket. Okay, that way we could easily go through all the people that, okay, you know what, they were in the first batch of fraudulent folks. Okay, we can now say that these people are not fraudulent. Okay, let's get them out the way. Then you have a reasonable number that you can spend your taxpayers' dollars on and go after. Okay, if they need to go to Virginia because they live in Virginia, fine. If they live in Virginia and they're paying enrollment, okay, put that in another basket, because obviously they're paying. Are we receiving the money? So those are low-hanging fruit. Communication is key. Okay, I think I've heard this before. I'm probably going to hear it several more times tonight. All you have to do is pick up the phone, call. Okay, maybe have 5 questions to quickly assess whether someone, you know, has the documentation or can provide the documentation within 24, 48 hours. Simple. It doesn't take 6 to 8 months. It doesn't take a year.
I'm sorry. We can continue asking questions, but we really have a really long agenda and more going on after this. So if we can get some great feedback about what we can do.
I'm happy to share just a few bullet points. We've been percolating about this for a long time, so these suggestions would be directed to OSSI, clearly. And the first one is to always reach out to the families and ask your questions prior to rendering judgment. So that falls into the communication category, I think. But an extension of the communication category is to work with the school. Who knows the students better? Our records have repeatedly been proven accurate, whereas those identified by OSSI were not. Work with us. We want to help. Share information with us. I cannot tell you how much we could have helped had we had the list of 220 families. Much of this could have been done away with, much of the angst, had we been allowed to help. That's what we're there for. Our small staff of 4 did better than OSSI's abundant staff and resources. So use us. We're happy. We're happy to help. The other one has to do with a mindset. Much of what came upon us was punitive in nature, but I think a shift in perspective with caring and understanding and supporting. That's where you come from to arrive at the truth, as opposed to punitive measures. And keep the success of the students a #1 priority. Not allowing students to attend school for any reason while you investigate is inappropriate and unacceptable. Keep the students in school at all costs until you're absolutely 100% sure that they are wrong. And then the last one is, when you're wrong, admit it. Admit it as publicly as you accuse. That builds trust. That an entity within the government can be honest and step up and own what they've done wrong goes a great distance in building trust between governmental agencies, I believe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I would just like to make a couple points. So Ms. Powell Harris mentioned that it was very important. It would have been very helpful had the school received the list of the 220. I will say on her behalf and on the behalf of the principal at the school, they made that request to OSSI in May. They made it again in June. They made it again in July. It was denied. It's still being denied. The request has been made several times, and for some reason, they will not give the list of names of these families to the school. If they had done that in May, as was indicated, this would not be the mess that it is today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just to speak on my situation personally, an investigation, the word investigation to me, it doesn't apply to the situation because it wasn't conducted. An investigation requires an interview. They never interviewed me. I had to walk down to First Street myself and actually chase them down. The day I got the letter, I called the IG, the first letter. They responded within the same day. They asked me questions. I forwarded them information. They told me I had nothing to worry about. A year later, OSSI was still continuously sending letters that completely disregarded all of the information that I had submitted to the school in December. I got a late night call around 10 o'clock at night. I was scanning information for them. And I just happened to be at work. And for them to put in writing that they didn't receive some information continuously, they clearly weren't even reading. So actually do an interview, first of all. Get some standards that are in line with reality. You know, we have families from different cultures, mixed families. It's not your cookie cutter family situation, you know. My two last names were questioned, which had nothing to do with my residency, you know. My birth certificate has two last names. My social security card has one last name. They continue to deter from the focus of the investigation. Are you doing a tax audit? Are you determining residencies? So they clearly were not even qualified to do to even call themselves investigators.
Thank you. Thank you.
Again, thank you. If we had, I mean, seriously, we have a tremendous, so you have 3 minutes exactly.
Okay. So, first, let me just also say to Ms. Fuchs, who came earlier, thank you for coming to talk to us about the star rating. And as Mr. Batchelor said, I hope that we will have ample time in the future to sort of talk about that and figure out how to make that a better evaluation and report to parents. On the Ellington situation, thank you guys so much for coming. I've learned so much from this. I've tried to follow it in the papers. And apologies to everybody for what you had to go through. I had a couple of people who called me about this while it was going on, and what I heard was very similar. It was inexplicable, it was incomprehensible, it was people picking at little details. So my heart goes out to you, and especially to the kids who had to deal with this. I have two questions. One, sort of a follow-up a bit on what Mr. Jones said, which is there's the rules, and then there's the investigation, and then there's the enforcement. And it sounds, I want to get some sense from people whether the rules are the problem, or there's a piece of the rules that are a problem, or is this really about the investigation and even, and I'm not an expert at this, it seems to me there's a distinction even between the investigation and then the enforcement. And that, so I'm curious where people think the problem is and where it needs to lie. And the second thing I want to ask, which also follows up a bit on what Mr. Jones said, is, look, government agencies often, it's just sort of the nature of the beast, government agencies often don't operate in the way that are the most sensitive or sensible because they're operating by a set of rules. But you need a place to go, right? Citizens need a place to go to get redress. There needs to be a place to appeal. There needs to be a place where you can easily go and get the review that's necessary, and that's doubly, triply true when we're talking about schools and we're talking about kids. And so my question to you is, where were you able to go and get decent redress?
I'm going to attempt to respond. As Mr. Smith mentioned during his remarks and suggested, OSSI actually, we're not sure OSSI understands the rules. Certainly some of the interpretations that they tended to, some of their interpretations were found to be erroneous. I think it was mentioned earlier, the first two letters that OSSI sent to the families were thrown out as insufficient to provide notice of what they were being accused of. I have colleagues who have represented families who've been involved in this, and they tell me that the interpretations that were put forward were just totally wrong, that there were people who didn't understand the regulations. The people who were enforcing them actually didn't even understand the regulations. So I think some work needs to be done to educate the people who are supposed to be enforcing these rules as to what the rules require and what is sufficient, what documentation is sufficient to establish residency. There was some inconsistency in the application there. I think my personal view, again, is that the school can be very helpful in this process.
I'm going to push you because your red light
Sure.
is beeping and the chair wants to move on. So you or someone else on this question of where were you able to go to get some redress? Where could you go to appeal? Where did you
Sadly,
go for someone to listen?
Mr. Smith will tell you the redress that was received was only received because they went to court. And my fear, frankly, is for the families that can't afford a lawyer, the people who basically were railroaded through this process because they did not have adequate legal counsel here, and they didn't have people like Mr. Smith representing them. I do personally believe to accommodate people who can't afford lawyers, an ombudsman of some, you might want to consider having OSSI create a position of an ombudsman or some party that can.
We have one.
Well, that person's
But not
not
for
doing
parents.
an adequate
not for
job
parents. I mean,
right
it's-
now, unfortunately, because that ombudsman was not made available at all to any of the families involved in this process.
As a parent, I had nowhere to go. The only information I received and knew anything about this entire process came from Mr. Smith.
But just for your information, in the future, we do have an ombudsman's office that is not tied to OSSI that parents can get redress from. Thank you.
Very helpful. Thank you.
I just got one minute, Madam President, and I appreciate you for your indulgence. Very quickly, I just want to say, and I don't even have to reiterate. I think our mutual concern about making sure that this process gets fixed, and especially to the parents who both felt targeted and harassed. I'm very sorry for that, and so I think you have all of our commitment that we want answers to what went wrong and how OSSI can do things better. The one thing I wanted to underscore before I close that I didn't want to go away was our issue with the funding formula, and I apologize that this process hindered your attempts to fill the gaps that aren't being filled at DCPS. I've advocated since day one, obviously, as a representative from Ward 8, where both our comprehensive high schools and our schools with low student enrollment get I think disproportionately impacted by a funding formula that's not right-sized. My hope is that DCPS will begin to right-size the funding formula so that we can rely less heavily, I think, on private philanthropy to provide the basics for our students, and even in a specialized program, provide those things that make that program special. So thank you for your advocacy around that, for your efforts to fill those gaps, and our hope is that we can fix this process so that the good work that you're doing isn't unnecessarily hindered in the future. So thank you.
Again, thank you for coming and bringing this to our attention.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam President, may I request that a copy of all the witnesses' testimonies regarding Ellington and a summary of the discussion be sent to the Deputy Mayor for Education, the Superintendent of Education, the Mayor, and the DC Council?
Second.
You did leave us copies of your testimony, everyone, right? Okay, thank you. Recognizing the achievements of our educators and school leaders is one of the most endurable parts of serving on the state board. Tonight, we are lucky enough to have two outstanding honorees. Kelly Harper, 2019 DC Teacher of the Year, Ms. Harper, and Ms. Rachel I'm going to butcher your name, I'm sorry. Tamelio. Melkin Educator Award winner. I would ask for unanimous consent for the resolutions to be considered in block.
So moved.
Second.
Seeing no objections, Mr. Haywood, would you read the resolutions into the record?
State Board of Education ceremonial resolution recognizing Kelly Harper, 2019 DC Teacher of the Year. Whereas the District of Columbia Office of the State Superintendent of Education has awarded the 2019 District of Columbia Teacher of the Year Award to a passionate educator, Kelly Harper, a third grade teacher at Amadon Bowen Elementary School. Whereas the DC Teacher of the Year must be a current pre-kindergarten through grade 12 District of Columbia Public Schools or public charter school classroom teacher. Whereas the DC Teacher of the Year received a $7,500 unrestricted award and an additional $1,500 award for conference travel, workshops, and professional development. Whereas Kelly Harper, a native Washingtonian, has been teaching for 7 years and since 2014 at Amadon Bowen Elementary School in Southwest Washington. Whereas Ms. Harper empowers her students to become the next leaders and change agents of their generation, becoming voices for marginalized communities that reverberate throughout the city and the world. And whereas Ms. Harper will now represent the District of Columbia in the Council of Chief State School Officers National Teacher of the Year competition. Now therefore be it resolved that the DC State Board of Education wishes to commend and thank Kelly Harper for her exceptional leadership, engagement, and dedication to the students of Amadon Bowen Elementary School and to congratulate her on the receipt of the 2019 District of Columbia Teacher of the Year Award. State Board of Education ceremonial resolution recognizing Rachel, see now I'm going to mess it up, sorry. Tamelio. Thank you, sorry. Whereas Rachel Tamelio, principal at Center City Public Charter School's Brightwood campus, has been awarded a 2018 Milken Educator Award, known as the Oscars of Teaching, through a confidential selection process of outstanding elementary and secondary school teachers, principals, and other education professionals. Whereas Ms. Tamelio is only the 14th winner from the district to receive this honor, as well as the district's sole recipient for the 2018-19 and among up to 40 honorees nationwide. Whereas she earned a Bachelor of Science in Mass Communication and Media Studies at New York University in 2004 and a Master of Science in Elementary Education at Mercy College in 2006. Whereas Ms. Tamelio, dang it, I'm going to mess it up every time, I apologize. Tamelio. You got it. See? Whereas Ms. Tamelio taught in the Bronx borough of New York City after enrolling as a New York City teaching fellow, founded the Urban Institute of Mathematics Middle School, and received training with TNTP. Whereas Ms. Tamelio joined Center City Public Charter Schools in July 2013 as assistant principal of City Center PCS Brightwood, and 2 years later became the school's principal. And whereas in her first year as principal, she earned the National Title I Distinguished School Award for Center City PCS Brightwood for closing achievement gaps for subgroups and students with disabilities. Now therefore be it resolved that the DC State Board of Education applauds and congratulates Rachel Tamelio for being named a 2018 Milken Educator and for her ability to inspire and motivate teachers, mobilize parent communities, and create schools where students can thrive.
Thank you. Is there discussion on the resolutions?
Can I comment on something, or is that after the resolution? No. So I just want to say, I used to have a friend named Billy Tamelio, and so I can pronounce it, and I have run into Ms. Tamelio in various places and have commented on this. The comment I really want to make is Center City School at Brightwood is one that I adore and I love, and I've been to visit there many times. And the reason is, as I've tweeted recently, is that it has a terrific knowledge-building curriculum that starts, I think, in pre-K, actually. And I've been there watching first graders and second graders learn ancient history and learn, science concepts. And it's a terrific model. And I think many other schools ought to be looking at it. It's why we started charters, right? Is be able to look at promising practices. I think it's terrific, and I'm so excited that you won this award.
Mr. Weedon?
Ruth beat me to it, but I also want to thank the Amadon Bowen community for coming, Principal Skikes, parents, teachers. It's remarkable what we've seen happen on the Southwest waterfront, and I will continue to support you in the work that you're doing, and just want to say, extend my congratulations to you. It's well earned. Thank you.
Any other comments? Thank you. Seeing no further discussion, the vote is on approval of ceremonial resolutions 1811 and 18-12. All in favor?
Aye.
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 All opposed? The ayes have it. If Ms. Harper and Ms. Tamilio and your guests come to the front, we will meet you right here. Oh, the board will stand in recess for 5 minutes for presentation of the resolutions. So we have to do that.
Is everybody here? All right, great.
There you go. Tall people. Everyone look for Paul.
Everybody look here. Great.
I used to work together at TNTV.
One more, then we're done.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you.
Yes. It felt weird.
Trying to be famous.
I didn't like it. Oh, I know.
I'm so proud of you.
The meeting's back in session. Thank you. An authentic partnership between students, families, schools, and the community at all levels of public education decision-making is essential. Families and communities must be a welcome presence at the decision-making table for processes, policies, and planning. The State Board and the Office of the Student Advocate are working together to develop a family engagement framework to support schools in the district in this process. The discussion tonight includes experts from local and national organizations demonstrating the widespread need for serious attention to these partnerships. We will have 2 panels tonight, each followed by questions from board members. When I call your name, please come forward. Faith Gibson Hubbard. Okay. Chief Student Advocate Nicole Newman, Senior Specialist, DC Public Charter School Board. Maya Martin, Founder and Executive Director of PAVE. And Allison Cryer Brown, Associate Director, Teaching for Change. A group of very familiar faces. Thank you. You will each have 5 minutes to speak tonight. And Faith, you may begin when you're ready.
Thank you. Should I? Oh, is it on? Is that good? Okay. Well, they found out that I was the ombudsman, the interim ombudsman for public education, so I was a little wrapped up outside. So I'm
sorry.
Happy. No, I think it was appropriate. So I am happy to be here. Speaking in my role of Chief Student Advocate, which I am all the time, about family engagement, which is something that's really important to me as a parent and also professionally as an educator. So as you know, my name is Faith Gibson Hubbard. I'm honored to serve in the role of Chief Student Advocate for the District of Columbia and lead the work of the Office of the Student Advocate. Our office provides guidance and supports to families to assist them in navigating our complex system of public education in the district. And in our day-to-day work, we support families through their advocacy, through parent education, one-on-one coaching, resource supports, trainings, and outreach. We do this work because we know that it's really important to equalize the balance of power between our systems of public education, education leaders, and also the voice, access, and power that we know that families have. In addition to our work with students and families and communities, every year we produce an annual report that summarizes our work and offers systemic recommendations to address the city's top public education issues and concerns. For the last 3 years, my office has made various recommendations regarding family engagement, and our work has articulated our vision of our office about family engagement and equity. And we've offered 2 recommendations every single one of those years, that an authentic family engagement with communities should be a mandatory part of public policy and decision-making processes. And we recommend a focus on designing a framework for regular citywide engagement of families and communities on issues of public education, public policy development, and decision-making processes. Something that we do not just when problems arise, but something that's always a structure that should always be in place. And secondly, we regularly see how the lack of coordination across agencies results in a misalignment of policies, confusion around resources, and uneven implementation of practices, as we just saw earlier. And it creates a barrier to access for families. And we've also talked about ways in which cross-sector collaboration, not just in a task force, but in a real way, can help to eliminate these barriers. Given our position within the DC government, we recognize how certain systems and processes within public education continue to feed into barriers for families, not only in their engagement, but just being able to access the type of education they want for their child. And so this need for a framework at the citywide level, I believe, is really important. And we've definitely seen enough public scandals and an increase in anxiety, and the levels of distrust of families who choose our systems of public education continue to increase. If public education has always been closely tied to democracy and the fundamental principle of public participation is in governance, we really need to have a quality system of public education. A quality system of public education is only possible when meaningful interactions which should be a part of our democratic process, and authentic relationships are fostered with students and families and communities. We recognize a need for equity in a lot of different areas, but I think this is one that we could very easily tackle if we really focus very critically on it. In reviewing our data over the past 3 school years, we do have a request for assistance line where families can call in and ask questions about anything related to public education. We've had several calls that are highly correlated between the issues of limited or lack of family engagement and also clear channels of communication and expectations within families, the schools that children attend. And over the more than 1,000 calls that we've received and the various different interactions that we've had, we've realized that this correlation has allowed these myriad of issues to still rise up on a daily basis at the school level and also at the citywide level. And schools' abilities and also the city's ability to cultivate meaningful relationships with families is really vital in order for us to move beyond the place where we are today. So in our work, as we work across with many of the people that are sitting at the table today and also with schools, we know that it's also our position that we have to try to do more in order to support the work of the people that will speak to you a little bit later. So not only do we have our request for assistance line, but we also really try to create other resource tools in order to support families' advocacy and their ability to be able to have conversations and engage. So the toolkits and resources that we have and our parent go-to guide. And so those tools are really helpful in ensuring that families can start conversations with their school and also raise questions about things that they see that may not seem right. But we know that there's a lot more that can be done. And I'm really excited about the people who will present next and about the opportunity that we have to work with the board around these recommendations that we've been giving for the last 3 years. While schools are doing their individual parts and organizations are doing their individual parts, until we're really able to work in a much more coordinated fashion and also really have a framework that we can all plug into in the same way when we're engaging with families, we really won't move much further forward, and it'll just continue to be siloed. So I do see this opportunity here today for testifying and hearing everybody that's coming next as a starting point for a conversation that needs to continue, not just this year, but in the years to come as we continue to work toward what can we do as a city to develop greater trust and relationship with families in a meaningful way to ensure that their expertise and the knowledge that they have really rises to the top as we are making decisions here in the city. So thank you for this opportunity to go over and breathe very heavily as I was running back in, but I do look forward to the additional conversation to come. Thank you.
Good evening, excuse me. Good evening, State Board of Education members, fellow panelists, and members of the public. My name is Nicole Newman, and I am the Senior Specialist of Community Relations at the DC Public Charter School Board. I want to thank you, especially Faith, for inviting me to testify about the importance of family and community engagement work, to share what we are doing at the Public Charter School Board and in partnership with public charter schools in our city. This work is vital to supporting DC students because we know when families, communities, and schools work together, students can succeed in college, the workforce, and beyond. We know students face multiple barriers to educational success, and the solutions require all of us to be active participants and leverage the strengths of students and their families. Today, I would like to share with you a little bit about the work that we're doing as an authorizer and use specific examples. It is my hope that this high-level look will give insight into how we've been approaching this work and to have us be a part of this continued conversation. In my role at the Public Charter School Board, I am solely responsible for building community relationships on behalf of the Public Charter School Board, educating stakeholders about the quality and diversity of public charter schools, responding to public feedback, and increasing schools' capacity for community and family engagement. Our goal is at all times to respond to concerns from families and communities quickly and to help schools build collaborative relationships that improve student outcomes. In our efforts to engage the quality of public charter schools, PCSB participates in dozens of community events, such as EdFest, ward-based fairs every year. We found that these events are excellent ways to both share information, but also answer questions about what our continuous role is and how we fit into the educational landscape in the city. As part of the founding team of EdFest, DCPCSB has participated in this event every year since its inception and will continue to take advantage of this opportunity to engage with parents and families. Additionally, we release pocket-sized guides of our school quality reports in 7 languages, and every year distribute more than 3,000 of these guides to every part of the city. This fall, we held 3 Voices in School Choice events that allowed us to learn more about the types of public charter schools the public believes we need and want to see in Washington, D.C. These events took place in Wards 1, 4, and 8. Parents, teachers, and community leaders and stakeholders shared with staff the academic and non-academic programming they hope to see in future charter schools, where new public charter schools should open, and how they define a quality school for themselves and their student. We are hopeful that this feedback will inform our application process this spring and going forward. These community conversations were the first of their kind, and we plan to hold more of these sessions in 2019. As a government agency, public comment is also an important way for the public to engage with us and give feedback to our board. Items are open for public comment, are available on our website, and people can submit written comment or speak at one of the 2 public comment periods that we host at our monthly board meetings. Every public comment that is submitted is read, and when applicable, DCPCSB will respond to public comments to address concerns, answer questions, and provide feedback. These are some of the ways that we are engaging communities and stakeholders. As I mentioned, I also work directly with schools, engaging them to engage their families and communities. Through our charter network, we offer family and community engagement trainings for schools. And as each of our public charter schools is unique, each has very different community and family engagement needs that they need to address. We work individually with schools and support them in meeting the individual needs, and will continue to find innovative strategies that encourage schools to engage their unique families and communities. We know that this work done well meets the needs of students and families and offers meaningful ways for schools to both get and give information to their families. DCPCSB is excited to continue to partner with schools and many of the organizations at the table in this work. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. Thank you. Good evening, State Board of Education members and State Board of Education Executive Director Hayworth. I want to give a special thank you to Chief Student Advocate Faith Gibson Hubbard for inviting PAVE and fellow organizations working to engage families across our city to share about our work and the challenges and opportunities in the family engagement space in DC. Founded in April 2016, PAVE is dedicated to creating an environment where the vision for education in DC is not created for children and families, but rather with children and families, shifting and changing the dynamics of power in our cities so that communities and parents are partners in creating great schools in DC. At PAVE, our parent leaders identify the issues that they want to move forward on behalf of our kids and our schools. Our network today is made up of over 2,000 parent leaders from all 8 of DC's wards. To achieve our vision for education and support parent voice in our city, PAVE currently carries out 3 streams of programming. While all 3 departments focus on building parents as advocates and engaging parent leaders around education policy, the primary difference is in our approach. Our community engagement organizing department focuses on traditional methods of community organizing, like one-to-one meetings and research meetings, in order to develop parent leaders across the city. Our parents testify before our elected bodies, like this one. They meet and share their experiences with policymakers and elected officials. They write blogs and opinion pieces about their issues. They access information about their issues, they network build with other parents, and they serve on ward-based parent leader and education boards that we call PLE boards in 6 of DC's 8 wards, wards 1, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, in order to identify and address the issues that they care about and that they think are critical to supporting our kids and their schools. Our monthly ward-based PLE boards have 118 members, and 13 members of the ward-based boards also serve on an additional quarterly citywide PLE board. Our policy and advocacy department focuses on building the tools, information, data, and resources that parents need to be informed advocates. The issues that they focus on are the ones that parents identify, namely at our annual Parent Policy Summit held in May of each year, where parents come together from across the city to both review the work of PAVE parent leaders in the past year and identify issues for the next year. Tomorrow, we're really excited that our parent leaders will be releasing their own statement of beliefs that they crafted around the two issues that they selected at the 2018 Parent Policy Summit: mental health supports and trauma-informed training in schools, and transparent citywide school funding. A group of citywide PLE board members and the ward-based board members have spent the entire fall identifying the city's gaps and needs around these two issues, and they will be sharing what they believe we need to do in order to take care of all of our kids in their schools around these issues. And they've also collected about 50 partner organizations who are going to partner with them to advance and advocate for making sure that we're actually taking care of all of our kids. Rounding out our work, our School Engagement and Partnerships Department focuses on parent engagement and advocacy through schools and partnerships in order to develop parent leaders and advocates within school communities. At PAVE, we realized that our schools did not have the deep, engaging, and trusted relationships with their families that they needed, and we began to encounter many families who did not want to engage in greater systemic policy change citywide until they had seen the same type of transformational voice at their schools. This year, we are hosting 2 PLCs with 30 school and network-based participants from across the city, with content built around 4 tracks: inform, how we communicate with families; engage, how we foster relationships; organize, how we strengthen and leverage parent relationships; and advocate, how we build the capacity of families to share their voices. All 3 programs contribute to our theory of change, which envisions an education system where parents are partners and leaders in creating a diversity of safe, nurturing, and great school options for every child in every ward and community, when given the policy information, community connections, and opportunity to become empowered leaders and advocates for DC's students and families. At PAVE, we know that when a parent advocates for their child, they see positive change for their child. And we know that when our parent leaders bring their voices together to advocate for all children, we see positive changes in our education system and realize the promise and the power of education. Parent voice and parent power in our education system allows parents to transform the lives of not just their child, but all the children in their community. We believe that together, our parent leaders will reimagine an education system in DC to be created by and with parents for all of our children. Thank you.
Greetings to the State Board of Education members and to all present. My name is Allison Kreiner Brown. You all have a written copy of my testimony, so I'm going to do a little bit of skipping through. So I'm the Associate Director of Teaching for Change, a DC-based nonprofit whose mission is building social justice starting in the classroom. I'm also a resident of Ward 8 and a DCPS parent. I was delighted to be invited to speak on this panel this evening, but even more excited to learn about the efforts to pursue a citywide family engagement framework for the District of Columbia. Founded in 1989 by a group of DC parents and teachers intent on addressing the needs of immigrant families and other students of color in the district, Teaching for Change believes that teachers, students, parents, and communities are the real catalysts for change, and schools have a particularly important role to play in shaping our future. They can participate in changing society or preserve the racial and economic inequities that exist. Teaching for Change has a nationally recognized approach to school-based family engagement called Telling Stories. It began as a storytelling project to bring families together across differences, and after 20 years has evolved into an approach that combines racial equity, popular education, community organizing, and best practices in family engagement. Instead of trying to, quote, fix parents of color and low-income families, we build stronger schools with multiracial parent power. By building relationships and capacity between parents and teachers, our approach increases families' access to schools and broadens their school-based roles as supporters, educators, advocates, decision makers, and ambassadors. A few highlights from our work in recent years. Our family engagement project has been written about and featured in Education Week, ASCD Express, The Atlantic, Education Leadership, Think Progress. We're also in the books Powerful Partnerships by Karen Mapp, Beyond the Bake Sale by Ann Henderson, Karen Mapp et al., and most recently, Sir Ken Robinson's new book, You, Your Child, and School. We also published last year, working in gentrifying communities. We published the first parent organization equity and inclusion tool. It's online in English and Spanish, available for free, along with a resource page that includes recommendations for schools serving gentrifying communities. And in 2016, we published a new version of our family engagement guide, Between Families and Schools, Creating Meaningful Partnerships. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. Some of our DC-specific highlights that are probably of greater interest to this body and to those present include, we've been formally evaluated by an independent evaluator for some years now. The most recent 3-year evaluation of our work, which finished in 2017, concluded Teaching for Change successfully helped parents build relationships with other parents and with school personnel. Responses from school personnel highlight the benefits of our parent engagement initiative on their professional development. Parents and school personnel agreed that parent engagement activities help support a welcoming climate in their schools. Our schools show evidence of creating multiple pathways for parent engagement for principals, teachers, other school staff. Our approach has contributed to shifts in their strategies for communicating with families, and we've established a foundation for parents to advocate on behalf of their children and schools. Some of the numbers from our work, for those of you who like numbers, just last year alone, we had 5 DCPS partner schools. We supported 171 family engagement activities, serving about 600 individual parents. And that's just from the sign-in sheets. And if you've ever been to a school meeting, you know people come and they sit in, and not everybody signs in on the sign-in sheet. So I always say our numbers are lowballed. But we average more than 14 parents per activity, and our activities that have the highest engagement are we facilitate meetings between parents and principals at our schools. Those across our schools tend to average about 17 parents across the course of the entire school year. So of course that fluctuates, but for the course of the year, we average about 17 parents across those 5 schools. This does not include sign-in sheets from back to school night, family literacy night, math night, science night, parent-teacher conferences. So activities that the school organizes themselves are completely separate from this. This is on top of what most schools are doing. Last year, more than 400 individual children at our partner schools had a parent lead multicultural book read-alouds in the classroom through our Roving Readers program. We tend to invite in the parents who think that they aren't the ones who could read in the classroom, and they read in English, Spanish, Amharic, and Mandarin across our schools. I'm going to skip ahead. We do, based on the research that we draw on and that we're familiar with, we do have several suggestions for where you should look as you dig into family engagement, into the research. The U.S. Department of Education's Dual Capacity Building Framework, Karen Mapp's new book, Powerful Partnerships, as I mentioned before, which in part, the 4th core belief they highlight states that the responsibility for cultivating and sustaining partnerships among school, home, and community rests primarily with school staff, especially school leaders. The book Beyond the Bake Sale offers a very helpful framework as well, which I highlighted, and also not as well known in the family engagement field, the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, which is one of our funders, has an excellent framework for transformative family engagement and guiding racial equity principles for family engagement. Those are not readily available on our site. We do have permission from the foundation to share those and would be happy to be a resource going forward. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Questions? Markus?
Thank you all for coming, and obviously for all the work you do on behalf of our parents. You know, I'll just say, one, I want to thank you all for really providing us with a wealth of knowledge and really some tips that are a part of, I think, your secret sauce on how you've been able to not just bolster parent engagement, which we know is important, but to really champion parent empowerment and parent voice and parent advocacy, which we know is critical in conversations at the school level, but also at the policy-making level, which I think brings me to my question, is what specific suggestions from the work that you do or from the research that you've seen in terms of best practices, what do you think this board could do to better engage parents around our policy-making abilities and the projects that we work on?
Thanks, Markus. And thank you. One, I would like to say thank you to you because you do a really great job of engaging with families generally, and you just did a great series in Ward 8 around amplifying parent and community voices and student voices around what they were seeing in education in the ward. I think one of the things that we hear a lot from families are about the barriers to access, especially around even meetings like this are generally hosted during dinner time. We always provide childcare at all of our events. We also provide food and not just pizza, although Mama's Pizza Kitchen is delicious. We usually offer the lasagna in our Ward 8 meetings, in particular because that just allows families to be able to participate in ways that are really meeting them where they are. I think the other thing that would be great is, you as an individual member have done that work to go out into the ward, but I wonder what this would look like to host some of the meetings like this at schools in the wards that you all serve. And so instead of the state board meetings being that they have to come to 441 4th Street, how about we switch that around and take 441 4th Street out into the communities? And I think that really makes a difference for a lot of families. I think in addition to that, what we hear a lot from families, and we heard this a lot at the onset of our work, was how are we actually breaking down policy to make it understandable? Oftentimes we're reading ceremonial resolutions and we're using language and terminology, and we love an acronym in DC. Hey, we're a victim, PAVE, which stands for Parents Amplifying Voice in Education. But I think there are ways that we can start to do a little bit more information building, where part of what we're doing is not just asking for things from families in terms of their perspective, but also feeding them in terms of giving them the information that they want to better understand how the system works and the kind of components of power so that they can amplify their voices in really strong and powerful ways. So those are a couple of things that I could immediately identify that we hear a lot from our families.
Yeah, so I'll chime in. I could give you probably a running list, but I'm going to say two things, particularly thinking about the audience for you all as the State Board of Education. So one is, we need you all to, quite frankly, push just how important family engagement is. There needs to be resources behind it. There needs to be systemic support. To their credit, and you all can pass this along, I have many conversations with the DCPS Family Engagement Office. To their credit, they are making positive steps, but we really need to improve systemically. And one of the research studies that's cited, if you look into the dual capacity building framework, they cite the Brike study, the Anthony Brike study out of Chicago, which found that there are 5 critical supports. When they looked at schools serving lower income students that saw dramatic gains, there were 5 critical supports. And what they found is if you took even one of those supports away, it would decrease the likelihood that students would make significant gains in reading and math by at least 10%. And family engagement was one of those. It's up there with teacher capacity. It's up there with the student-centered learning environment. It is something we have not invested in. So we need from all areas, we need pushes on systemic family engagement that has resources behind it. And I'll also echo Maya's comments for you all about coming to the schools. I know you all have limited resources and availability yourself, but for instance, with the ESSA, when we were going through the report card conversations, I led at least 4 of those meetings at our schools ourselves, and parents of every single education level and every single language, we brought in interpreters for that to make sure that our parents got feedback in, because we knew they weren't going to make it down there, and we helped them with taking the comments and turning those into letters. And so we had parents at some of our schools submit that in. And they can understand it. When you bring people information and you engage with the person and not push, just facts and policy, and it's the same fault, or the trap, I'll say, that our schools fall into. So a lot of teachers will tell you they don't get support on how to actually engage with parents. Same thing with our school leaders. So we need a lot of systemic support. So yes, we need you all to beat the drum, and we're certainly all happy to beat the drum and support that ourselves.
You go ahead.
No, go ahead. You're first. We're so polite over here.
I would also offer many of the same things, but engaging before we really need something. And I think what is often really frustrating is that we come when there's a policy issue and we're like, come on, tell us what we need to do, instead of really engaging to build relationship, and also engaging the same way as you would engage like experts here at the table. As a parent, I am not only an expert on Colton and Emerson, but I am also an expert on a lot of things that I would like to see differently within my school, within my community. And a lot of policy ideas can be generated in that way. And that is also how, when distrustful things happen, trusting relationships are already established, and there are places where you can go to really have these conversations. Mm-hmm. I think there are many times that we're just coming and saying, now it's time for ESSA, or now it's time for these things, because we do have limited capacity. But really finding ways to, I know my office, the work that we do is only possible really because we work with the people here, some of the people who are also going to testify next. And so I think really engaging to establish relationship is really, really important, and believing that when you sit down with them, that like what Laura said, Laura Fuchs said earlier, that they do have a lot to give. I think a lot of times we think from a deficit mindset, oh, families can't understand these things, or, and that's really what starts the breakdown of trust even further, when we already have a significant legacy of distrust and reasons why they shouldn't want to engage.
Yeah, I would just add that one of the things we found that has been really effective is leaning on partners, right? So Faith's office has a very nice document that lays out kind of the educational landscape in the city. There was no need for the DC Public Charter School Board to recreate that. Maya's organization produces policy one-pagers that really break down funding or break down, I think it was ESSA. And so we, as much as possible, try to leverage the partnerships that exist at this table so that we don't have to do things that are duplicative and that we're driving parents to the resources that already exist. And I would also say like the thoughtfulness by which we engage, right? So we try to bring people who are experts, like when we do things with our Parent and Alumni Leadership Council, we bring people who are experts into the conversation, and we say, be very clear about what you're asking parents for feedback around, like answer their questions. I will sometimes sit in those sessions to kind of pause when I see parents' eyes start to glaze over and they're like, what is happening? So we try to, as much as possible, pair people who are experts in policy with people who have some of the softer skills and can read a room and say, this conversation needs to be pared down a little bit. And I think that marrying those has meant that the level of engagement that we've had with families has increased, and the level of feedback that we've been able to get has been more meaningful, because I'm not trying to explain complex policy things, and our policy people aren't like being policy people all over our families, right? So it tends to, we want to balance those things.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much for being here tonight. I'm curious about, in your wildest dreams, when I hear about what the system would do to engage families, how the system would operate differently, engaging families, tell me what that looks like. Could you paint a picture?
I think for me, that would include schools having those resources. So I think that all of the public charter schools in the city are really in different places. Some have staff capacity to do this work. Some places it's being done by people who maybe have other roles within the organization. And so I think that for whatever the LEA's vision is for what family engagement looks like for them, that they would have the supports necessary to drive what that looks like.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to come at it from a policy perspective because that's what we do and believe in. I really think for what we hear the most from families is they want to be there at the onset of policy, and I think that goes to what Faith is talking about. They're often engaged once policy has pretty much already been decided and determined, and we're just trying to communicate it to them versus what would that look like if we actually asked them what they wanted to see around that policy before we've even made a decision. And so in my wildest dreams would be that they would be at the onset of that creation process, that we wouldn't have to even identify that we have 2 parents on every task force, right? But rather that parents were constantly a part of that conversation, and that we were actually even identifying new policies and ideas from families. One of the things that I saw that was really powerful was actually out of Councilmember Grasso's office at our Parent Policy Summit. His policy person at the time for the Committee on Education, Darby Hickey, stayed for our entire Parent Policy Summit. She traveled between each table, and we had 150 parents that were there, so 15 different tables from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. to listen to each of them and hear what they were talking about. Because she said they wanted to identify policies that parents actually wanted to start to create. That's a totally different creation process than we've already determined. There is a solution that we are going to make, and now we want to know what you think about it. And so that would be my wildest dreams and imagination.
Just a very quick follow-up. What would that look like at like a DCPS level, right? So we have the Chancellor's Parent Cabinet. Some people could say like, tick, we've done that, right? Like they're part of this conversation for a year. So what do you think that would look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things we've, and we're about to come out with this a little bit around transparent citywide school funding, right, and actually engaging parents at the onset of the budget process, where we both teach them about what is a budget, right, and then what if you could imagine what a budget would look like for your school, what would that look like? I think one of the things for us that's really important is that we're not just relying on a couple voices, and we say that even for ourselves. Our parents are not representative of all parents, and so even for our families, when we do work, we push them to get out there and hear from other families, whether or not that's through them hosting house meetings themselves to gather information from families about what they want to see around mental health and transparent citywide school funding, or even for parents to do canvassing, going door to door and talking to families, because not everybody has 2.5 hours to come out to a chancellor's cabinet or another meeting, but trying to both go deep in terms of that feedback, but also wide and get it from as many families, and letting families be the conveyors and the leaders of connecting with other families in that work, and trusting them as people who are going to bring that back and level that up as we create policy.
So if I knew I was going to be asked to bring my wish list, I would have written it down and brought it. But in our work, we really like to focus on hyper level and local level and pushing up. All politics is local. So a lot of my recommendations, everything from parent centers, parent coordinators, people say all the time, there's sort of this recognition of folks who work in family engagement. We have to build relationships. Okay, well, where in the school can we do that? That's not the hallway where people are walking through, and you want to have spaces where people can actually sit and have a conversation and not be in the way. Staff to actually engage with parents who really can take dedicated time for that. That sort of can tie in with, there's a discussion I know some of you all have been a part of community schools. It's sort of tied in with that. We actually need resources behind this, but really a lot of my recommendations, aside from really the state board level, if you want parents to be more engaged at the State Board of Education level, at the DC Council level, we have so many people who are shut out of having any relationships or knowing what's going on at their individual school. How are you going to expect me to come to a State Board of Education meeting or testify at DC Council? I don't even know what's going on in my school. So we have to do things to help build relationships, open up transparency at our schools, and quite frankly, the schools that we work in, we're working in all DCPS schools. The schools that Teaching for Change works best in are where we have school leaders and staff who say, we know that our parents are valuable partners, but we really don't know what this is supposed to look like, and we only have so much time. And so we're working and supporting there, but even at the schools that are really willing, they need more resources, they need more time, we need more effort. But as much as we can improve at the individual level, then people start to get involved on higher levels. And I think that's why so many parents feel shut out, going above the school levels, because even at their school level, they really don't know what is going on unless there is a concerted effort and support.
I would also say, I don't think we can just rely on traditional channels. Of course, there are certain groups. I mean, I love Maya, and she knows it, but every time I go places, people are like, oh, I'll just go to PAVE. Well, PAVE is one option, but PAVE is not the only option. So I think a lot of times it's also not having knowledge of what's really out there. And what I hope comes from the process, this particular process, is not only knowledge of other groups that are doing work that you can plug into to support. So even what Kindred is doing, and just other different mechanisms. I was even talking to someone about a completely different issue around bullying, but the way in which they are engaging families, that is an infrastructure that people should know to plug into. And it should be the first thing on our mind when we're thinking about anything. How are we going to go deep to get to the voices that we want to hear from? And I know that as a professional, I love family engagement. As a parent, I don't have time. And, if somebody's like, come to the LSAT meeting, I'm like, well, that's great, but I actually don't have time, and I really want to know. And family engagement is my passion professionally, but as a parent, I'm like, I just don't have time to do that. And I was at a meeting today for something for my son, and the principal was like, I really want your thoughts on something before you go. And he was finding me where I was in that moment, and he wasn't even trying to tap into what my expertise is professionally, but also the school knows me as a parent and knows my child. And so I think it starts at that level where you can also just identify parents one-off. It's really hard as we host meetings too, even as the Office of Student Advocate for special education or bullying or the safe passage work that we've been doing. It's really, really hard to engage people. But I've definitely been out and I've knocked on people's doors. I've had conversations just because I really want to go very deep. And I know that can be hard, but being able to have other structures to plug into, like if I know I can't do it, or if a meeting's not going to quite work out, Nicole's like, oh, well, maybe I can help you with doing that. And I think that's really what we need, is that structure where we can know here's the infrastructure and here are the ways in which we can plug in to ensuring that we're getting to the deepest levels, because I love being here tonight, but it is hard to get to 441. It's hard to get to the Wilson building. It's even hard sometimes to get to your library down the street, you know, when you're trying to do things. So just having the infrastructure and the knowledge about what's available so that decision makers as well as parents can plug into the infrastructure that's available.
And we have some secret sauce too that we'd be willing to share as far as how we open up those doors and get more parents involved than you would normally see at other schools.
Thanks, you all, for coming out. I have some very specific questions, which I'll just throw out broadly and people can answer them. One is, I think my Martin was saying, parents come and they develop policies. So I'm just curious, what are the policies that they want developed? Sort of both what topic area and what are the policies? Second, someone talked about the DCPS Family Engagement Office as providing a very good service. I wonder if somebody could talk about what more they could do, or what about it is great, or something, to be very specific. 3, what about the LSAT structure? How do you think that works? Does that become a way to engage? And then 4, I'm just following up on some of the things that Faith said about, you know, people are very busy. It's part of why in life and in our country we have representative democracy, right? All of us can't all the time take on everything, but you have representatives, ideally, who know enough about what matters to you and are in a position to, and have some responsibility to convey that. And I wonder, I guess that's sort of related to all the questions, but maybe especially on the LSAT, whether, you know, ideally that could be an opportunity where people in the school are representing other people in the school. Does it work? Could it work? Should it work?
Okay, I took notes. Yes, I can touch on each of these quickly. The part about policies, you started, what was the question again about policies?
Well, Maya really raised that
policies
part.
that parents want, yes.
Yeah, that they actually were developing in this group. So
yes, I know there's talk about the funding. We're also a member of the Language Access Coalition. There's not enough resources for interpretation at our schools. After school and out of school time is an issue that cuts across boundaries. I think you said mental health, more counselors, less police. There's a lot of energy around that. I'll give you an example of how we engage parents within a school, even on a policy that's important to them. So we at one of our schools that I'm not going to name, noticed that there have been parents who were, I'm going to say very passionate is the word I'm going to use. They were very passionate with the school staff because they were coming just before pickup and trying to get their children so they could get across town, they could go pick up the other child, they could get to daycare, they could get dinner started, and the school staff was very resistant, and so parents were getting very passionate with them. So we noticed this, and one of our requirements for partnering with the school is we require our schools to do monthly open parent-principal chit-chat. So it's a monthly meeting that the parents have access to the principal, and what we are talking with parents about, that goes into the agenda. It's not just the principal gets to talk at parents for an hour and then leave 5 minutes for questions at the end of 55 minutes. So it's a jointly created agenda, and so since this issue kept coming up, that was the topic for the next principal chat. And the principal told this wonderful story. She said, I know this is something that we're hearing a lot about, people getting really upset about it. And she said, I was in a classroom a few weeks ago, and she said it was 3 o'clock, and a call came up to the teacher, please send little Johnny down for dismissal. And because they were trying to go wherever, so 3 o'clock instead of 3:15. And she said the teacher, who had not finished the lesson, had to pack up his backpack, get everything in it, and then as he was leaving, he hugged and said goodbye to every single one of the 27 students in his class. Now, how adorable is that? But also, how disruptive is that? And so the parents could understand where the hesitation, like, yes, it's easier on us if we can get, out of here, but this is why this is a policy of the school, right? You're not supposed to dismiss before dismissal or at a certain point. And yet there are opportunities to engage there. So you all have policies in mind as very specific things, but often to our parents, policy means an everyday thing. That why has this happened? Why don't we have this? And those are the opportunities that we need to create. The DCPS Family Engagement Office, I will give them a shout out for home visits, for APTT meetings. We have a similar model to that. Their staff is at the Family Engagement Conference every year. I feel like that's when I see them most, because they're very busy. But they understand it. They too could use more resources. I know there are things that they would like to do if they had even more targeting of principals. That's something we like to do. I don't have time to touch LSAT. Some good things, some areas for improvement. And then yes, people are busy, but we have to create, what we do in our work is we try to create the opportunities to make sure that that the school is regularly engaging with parents, and also there are opportunities for either A, when things come up, or two, when somebody does get that time. So when our parents read in the class, we do a training for our Roving Readers program, but the program is also structured so that if this was the one day where you said, I could actually stay for half an hour, and you knew that parents read in the classrooms, you said, yeah, I could stay, you could drop in, and even if you are not literate, you can be one of our readers. And we've structured this program so some of our strongest readers are not actually functionally literate. So when our schools create opportunities, we find that parents will find ways to prioritize them. They will come, and then also we've had all kinds of issues. One of our schools got a new principal. Well, guess what? The next week we had a parent-principal chat on the calendar. So parents knew they would have a forum where they could come to hear about these issues. So there are specific things that our schools can do.
Representative democracy, I think, is important. But once again, that is one traditional avenue. And I do think we have to continue to push kind of deeper. So you are a person who represents, a certain constituency, but a large constituency, right? And so you have to have other places in which you can plug into. So I think people are busy, but there are also signals that people give to us sometimes that they do want to engage if we're willing to come to where they are to engage. So I think we just have to think about how that could look more broadly. I think the LSAT structure is a structure that's one that works for DCPS schools. And I think what I want to be very aware of in this particular process is that it may not work for some of the other schools which are not DCPS schools. And I know that at my son's school, we have an LSAT, and it's built out because we don't have a traditional parent organization. The LSAT has all these different committees and different ways in which you can support the school, as well as there's a lot of different infrastructure. So I think if the LSAT has flexibility in it so that a school can really have it implemented at their school in a way that works for the culture and needs of the school, then I think yes. So the way that it's developed at my son's school may not work at another school that doesn't have parents who want to be at the school all day, right? Or don't have that luxury. So I think maybe some elements, but there would also be some schools, I'm sure, that would rise to the top that feel like their voices aren't really heard on their LSAT, and it's just kind of a check the box thing that Laura mentioned earlier. Like, we have that check and it's not as functional and deep because parents don't always necessarily feel like they're really making some of the decisions that they should be informing. So I think we would have to think about what structures work, and maybe we need to move beyond just what the DCPS structure is and look at some of the other public charter schools or other models in other places that may say, here are some governance things that we can do at the school level that can help in kind of that reporting out on what the schools need, and also ways in which we can maybe engage with those school communities more deeply.
Yeah, so one, I would say, in terms of like starting with representative democracy, right, there is always an inherent challenge when we talk about structures that were created for essentially a group of white men created that in the United States in order to perpetuate certain people being in power. And so if we're really going to turn that on its head and start to give access and equity to all people that are part of the system, sometimes we have to rethink what we're talking about when we're talking about representative democracy. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that certain people are only representing all constituents, but rather that they're actually listening and hearing from all of their constituents regularly, because demographics and people and challenges change, and so you have to constantly have a pulse on what's going on and how all those things are percolating. So one of the things I would really encourage is that when we think about how we're doing that, is that we're not ever thinking that any one voice is more important than the others, and that if we are resourcing or accessing individual voices, as Faith talked about with PAVE, we're actually thinking about how we're continuously expanding that's not the only thing that we're thinking about, and that we're getting outside of and broadening that. So I think that means that we're surveying families, that we're going to communities to do focus groups and feedback sessions, that we're hosting them at different times, that every room that we're in, we're thinking about, are the families that are represented there actually representative of the community that we're serving? So are we missing families who are not English dominant? Are we missing families who are not, new residents to DC and native Washingtonians? Are we missing families that are from different ethnic backgrounds? Are we missing families who are from different religious backgrounds? We have to constantly be asking ourselves if we're doing that and doing it well enough. And I think we're in the business of education and teaching, where it's an iterative process that we're constantly trying to get better at and learn more about. And so the best representative democracies, I think, are actually one day going to be the ones that are constantly doing that in every way possible in order to reach all people. I think on the second question of the LSATs, I think the challenge that we have goes back to this representative democracy question, where many times when we talk to our families, they don't even know the other families that are on the LSATs. Similarly to many times when we talk to our families, they can't even tell you the other parents that are on their charter boards, and there are 2 on each of them, right? And so, that's not necessarily, while it's an important vehicle, it's not a vehicle that everyone in the building knows or understands, and so we need to do a better job at actually making sure that we're not just, relying on those 2 people or from the charter boards or those 3 people who are on the LSAT, but rather getting communication to and from families on a regular basis in different ways from and to both of those bodies. We talk about it at PAVE, and we did some work with charter board partners around this to bring folks in, and both board directors and the parent members, about communication as a 2-way street. It's about the relationships that Allison referenced, that until you build those relationships, you don't have the trust where people are really feeling comfortable sharing and being a part of that community. So I think that's important. With regards to the Office of Family and Public Engagement, one of the interesting things is last year I facilitated a professional learning community for their office where we worked every month to start to think about, one, how as the system do they open themselves to the organizing and voices of its families, right? So we talked about Ernesto Cortez and his work with the Industrial Areas Foundation and organizations schools that they had seen change and shift when organizations of parents were coming together to advocate for things in Texas and California. So they're not the organizers, and they shouldn't necessarily be the conveners of families, but they should create the opportunities for families as they're convening to come together and bring their voices. And I think more opportunities for them to share and learn. I think part of what Allison is talking about is them coming out to a conference, but are we always thinking about the opportunities for some of our professionals who work in family and community engagement to actually have other professionals who are working on this to elevate their practice? We think about that for teachers, we think about that for leaders, but are we actually thinking about that for everyone? And I would extend that past the Office of Family and Public Engagement to talk about the charter school folks that Nicole references in terms of people who are working on this at the charter school level. And then I think in the last component around policy, the 2 policies that our parents identified at the summit, and they actually had 5 that are tied to their core values, but the 2 that they elevated the most were mental health supports and trauma-informed training in schools and transparent citywide school funding, and that's what they'll be releasing their statements around. But essentially they have a bunch of things that they'd like to see done differently. Mental health supports, they'd actually like to see not just investments in the staffing in our buildings, but also in addition to that, the funding generally for at-risk students, how we're funding the Department of Behavioral Health, because many of these issues are cross-cutting, not just in education, but in healthcare and other systems, and how are those systems working together in order to support our kids. And then socio-emotional learning, so actually how are we building curriculum that is allowing our students to build who they are, not just academically, but as people, because people are not one component. We are all made up of emotions and feelings and thoughts and perspectives. And so that was one, and the other is transparent citywide school funding in terms of making sure that actually parents understand the budgeting process, that they're engaged in the budgeting process at the onset, and that then parents are a part of the budgeting process moving forward in both of our sectors. Because when you talk to families, sometimes they can't even necessarily tell you what sector their kid. Rachel Tamelio has a perfect example. Oftentimes her families will tell you they go to Brightwood, right? But there's a Brightwood education campus literally right around around the corner from Center City Brightwood, and the families can't tell you which one is the charter school and which one is the DCPS school, because all they know is that their kid is in a school that's taking care of them and meeting their needs. And so families only want to know that in all parts of our system, either sector, for all kids and all families, are we actually taking care of our kids.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you so much. Our second panel tonight, I just have to say, ladies, I've worked with all of you, and you all do a great job. Thank you. Natasha, how you say your last name? I'm sorry? Quiroga. Come to the table. Thank you. Kiami Harris, Director of Capacity Building Programs. I'm sorry, Ms. Quiroga, you're the Director and Senior Counsel for the Washington Lawyers Committee. Right. Okay. Actually, I used to work for them, so. And Jason King, Executive Director, and Cheryl Lewis, Partnership Manager, Turning the Page. All right, you may begin when you're ready.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today, and thank you to Faith for the invitation. My name is Natasha Quiroga. I direct the Parental Readiness and Empowerment Program, or PrEP, and I'm Senior Counsel in the Educational Opportunities Project at the National Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights and Law. So not our affiliate, the Washington Lawyers Committee, but at the national office. And I'm here to give the national perspective as we provide the PrEP program across the country. Family engagement and parental empowerment is essential to a child's opportunity to succeed educationally. The opportunity and achievement gaps between minority and non-minority students are widening as the percentage of minority students increases. The gaps are alarmingly worse in states with large minority populations, especially regarding school discipline. But research shows that regardless of family income or background, students with engaged parents are more likely to earn higher grades, enroll in higher level programming, and graduate. The difference between an involved and disengaged parent can make as much as a whole grade level difference in a child's academic achievement. The importance of tapping into family engagement and parental power to mobilize for their children's educational opportunities and to contribute to their educational success is clear. While encouragement at home is important, it cannot substitute for a good school and informed parents. Yet clear information regarding school policies and education laws is often difficult for families to find and to understand. This nexus is where the Lawyers Committee's Parental Readiness and Empowerment Program, or PrEP, brings its expertise to increase parent and student self-advocacy while also improving due process and education-related matters. By increasing family engagement and building effective partnerships between families, educators, and other stakeholders in low-income and communities of color, PrEP helps parents advocate for and effect positive changes in schools and system-wide. These changes help children succeed academically and reduce the likelihood that they may drop out of school. PrEP works to improve K-12 student performance, reduce the racial achievement gap, and provide equal access to quality educational opportunities for our nation's most vulnerable children. We accomplish our work by leveraging the efforts of parents, schools, civil rights groups, the private bar, and the philanthropic community. PrEP began over 8 years ago, launching in-person parental empowerment and advocacy workshops in San Diego, California, with the support of volunteer attorneys and in partnership with the San Diego Unified School District. Since then, and out of both need and demand, we have expanded to New York, Minnesota, Virginia, Maryland, Mississippi, and Louisiana, and provide technical assistance in many other states. Our major goal is to guarantee students receive equal educational opportunities in public schools, increasing their chances of succeeding in higher learning institutions and the workforce. By implementing strategies to guarantee K-12 students equal access to quality educational opportunities, PrEP serves families of color with children at heightened risk of academic failure due to socioeconomic status, limited parental educational attainment, language barriers, cultural assimilation challenges, and special physical, behavioral, or learning needs.
PrEP offers parents multiple points of access to critical skills and information through in-person workshops in select cities and a national online platform. PrEP builds local capacity and leverages the resources of the local school district and other community-based organizations to create enhanced community networks that support parents in these states. With the accessible educational resources provided by PrEP, families gain a basic understanding of the laws and regulations applying directly to their children's schools, including special education, bullying, school discipline, and English language learners' rights. Parents are better prepared to advocate for their child and are encouraged to look for more local information about their child's education. With our educational advocacy skills workshops, webinars, and video tutorials provided by our experienced PrEP staff attorneys, and often co-facilitated with our local partners, participating parents improve their ability to advocate for their child, increase their personal confidence in their advocacy skills, and increase their likelihood to advocate for their child. As a result of participating in free in-person educational consultations with pro bono attorneys and our virtual appointment platform, parents are able to use what they learn to support their children and learn about, get advice, ask questions, and provide input regarding specific educational topics and processes. In the states where PrEP activities are ongoing, it has created partnerships between families, educators, and other key stakeholders. In those states, PrEP's facilitation has led to parents advocating for improved educational services for not only their own children, but also mobilizing to advocate for district-wide policies impacting larger groups of children, such as improved district communications with English learner families, reducing disproportionate discipline rates, and bullying prevention initiatives. The Lawyers Committee advocates for strong family engagement policies, as our work has shown that informed and engaged parents can overcome barriers to strive for equal educational opportunities for their children. It is critical that the DC State Board of Education prioritize developing a district-wide family engagement framework with the participation of parents and guardians in the decision-making process. The research is clear, and the students of this district deserve the benefits that family engagement can bring. Thank you.
Good evening, State Board of Education members. My name is Sherelle Lewis, and I'm representing Turning the Page as the partnership manager. Since 1998, Turning the Page has engaged public school parents to become more active participants in their children's education in Washington, D.C. through resource-rich programming that connects families, communities, and schools. Our partners include universities, museums, and other educational organizations. Because of our unique partnerships with families, schools, and the community, we are proud to have become a leader in the family engagement space and have been involved in many conversations like this one to share the importance of family engagement and the powerful impact it has had in Wards 7 and 8. Today, in support of the continued effort to increase family engagement throughout the city, we would like to detail highlights in the impact of our work as a testament of the benefits of strong family engagement frameworks. Our work encompasses pre-K through 8th grades, so we tailor our programming to fit the needs of our families and their learners. For parents with young children, we introduce the concepts of reading at home, how parents can effectively track their students' reading progress, and how to develop effective parent-teacher relationships. Additional topics include STEM, social-emotional learning, and the importance of summer learning. For parents of middle school students, we introduce the academic pathways and career opportunities available to students and how parents can help their students make great decisions for their future. Over the course of our 20 years, Turning the Page has been able to successfully engage more than 6,000 families, distributing more than 100,000 books for their home libraries. Our definition of successful engagement encompasses a three-pronged analysis of behaviors that families display after participating within Turning the Page events, to include whether parents use the educational resources provided by Turning the Page, how these resources are being used, and finally, involvement in parent leadership. Based upon our evaluations, 86% of our families who've received books from us use them with their children at home. 42% of families reported reading to their children every day, and 34% of families read with their children between 4 days and 6 days each week. Outside evaluations have additionally found that children of parents participating in Turning the Page programs received higher DIBELS and TRC scores than their peers. In 2014, after being approached by a consortium of funders in Chicago, Turning the Page successfully replicated our programs in the West Side community of Chicago and have seen, similarly strong outcomes. Students with parents participating in TTP programs in Chicago are also outperforming their peers. 95% of parents involved with Turning the Page agree that they feel more comfortable sharing their ideas or concerns with their school. We have seen evidence of that in our parent leader initiatives, where our parents have led school and community initiatives to establish school gardens, health and wellness programming, summer learning resource fairs, and service projects in their communities. Parent leaders have advocated for enhanced after-school resources and bullying prevention and have served in a variety of leadership positions in the city, such as the Chancellor's Parent Cabinet, the Chancellor's Selection Committee, and the Mayor's Bullying Prevention Task Force. In review of our leadership development, one Turning the Page parent stated that Turning the Page workshops harness the collective power of parent advocates throughout her community and bolstered her resolve with the knowledge that our issues, challenges, and concerns are not isolated. The workshops introduced her to speakers, concepts, and other resources that were informative, galvanizing, and inspiring. She said she gets her fire from Turning the Page. Parent perspectives like these ones sustain our confidence in the importance of this work. The long-lasting effects of an empowered parent base has the potential to shape the educational community in ways that continue to harmonize efforts among families across multiple wards. We believe that with the right supports and platforms in place, the barriers families experience in accessing schools and information can be dramatically reduced. Effective family engagement has the power to bridge relationships with families and schools, offering unique opportunities for families to see themselves as agents of change in their schools and community. As leaders in family engagement, we will proudly continue to fuel the fires that we think represent the diverse needs of this district's education system, and we hope that this board considers the benefits of prioritizing great investments in family engagement to ensure quality education for all in DC. Thank you.
Thank you. Board members' questions?
I'll just say very quickly, thank you all for your helpful suggestions and for your work, especially Ms. Lewis. Yes, thank you and Turning the Page for all the work you do, especially in communities in Ward 8, where I know our families are benefiting from the work you do, and you know, I think more broadly our schools and communities. So thank you, and you know, I definitely think your suggestions as well as the last panel are very helpful as we begin as a new board in January thinking about how we do things differently to empower our families in the policy making practice that we have here. So thank you very much, and thank you as well.
Thank you.
Any other comment, questions? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I really appreciate you coming and really appreciate that you stayed so late to testify. Yeah.
Madam President?
Yes, sir.
If I could also note, if the witnesses who have not provided written testimony could email it to the board so we can put it online, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Maya. Thank you. Tonight, unfortunately, the State Board says goodbye to 3 of its members. Laura Wilson Phelan from Ward 1, Mark Jones from Ward 5, and Joe Weedon from Ward 6. Each of these members has devoted themselves to the work of the State Board to make things better for the students of the District of Columbia. I personally am very grateful for them and for their leadership, and especially for their insights. I'm going to add a little bit. We don't always agree, but we can always find a way. Thank you so much. We celebrate their work tonight with ceremonial resolutions. At the end of the meeting, I would like my colleagues to join me in the well for the presentation of the resolutions. I will now ask for unanimous consent that the resolutions be considered in block.
So moved.
Seeing no objection, Mr. Haywood, would you read the resolutions into the record?
State Board of Education ceremonial resolution to honor State Board of Education member Laura Wilson Phelan, CR 18-13. Whereas the District of Columbia State Board of Education recognizes the stewardship of Laura Wilson Phelan and her dedicated service on behalf of Ward 1 in improving educational outcomes for the students in the District of Columbia since January 2015. Whereas Laura Wilson Phelan is a former middle school teacher who left the classroom to lead social change efforts at grassroots and management levels over the past 20 years. Whereas Laura's co-chairmanship of the SBOE High School Graduation Requirements Task Force led to the incorporation of the strongest efforts to create a truly representative education policy task force in the history of the District of Columbia, with a particular focus on representation from Wards 7 and 8, where a majority of the district's school-aged children live. Whereas Laura's professionalism and steadfast commitment have made a lasting impact on the activities and outreach of the State Board of Education. And whereas the SBOE acknowledges the incredible dedication Laura Wilson Phelan has provided to close the opportunity gap and increase educational equity. Now therefore be it resolved that the District of Columbia State Board of Education honors Ward 1 Representative Laura Wilson Phelan on the 19th day of December in the year 2018 for her outstanding service and leadership to the District of Columbia. State Board of Education Ceremonial Resolution to honor State Board of Education member Mark Jones, CR 18-14. Whereas the District of Columbia State Board of Education acknowledges the decade of outstanding service Mark Jones has provided on behalf of Ward 5 since January 2009. Whereas Mark is also a public school parent, a longtime public servant in multiple mayoral administrations, a school and community volunteer, and an accomplished small businessman. Whereas Mark has been a champion of the SBOE's authority and vital role in the district's education landscape, providing strong guidance as president in establishing the independence of the agency. Whereas Mark has been a steadfast advocate for the professional staff of the SBOE and through his leadership helped create the strong foundation upon which the agency operates. And whereas Mark played a crucial role in the reestablishment of the Office of the Ombudsman for Public Education and the creation of the Office of the Student Advocate, independent offices within the State Board of Education that provide direct services to district families and students. Now therefore be it resolved that the District of Columbia State Board of Education honors Ward 5 Representative Mark Jones on the 19th day of December in the year 2018 for his outstanding service and leadership to the District of Columbia. State Board of Education Ceremonial Resolution to honor State Board of Education member Joe Weedon, CR 18-15. Whereas the District of Columbia State Board of Education acknowledges the outstanding service that Ward 6 Representative Joe Weedon has provided since January 2015. Whereas Joe has been dedicated to increasing the engagement of parents in decisions that impact the success of district schools in all aspects of education policy. Whereas Joe has been a vocal advocate for increased transparency and public engagement in our school systems, serving on the Eastern High School and Elliott Hine Middle School local school advisory teams, the Office of the State Superintendent of Education's Title I Committee of Practitioners, and the boards of 3 nonprofit organizations focused on expanding after-school programming. Whereas Joe's participation in SBOE committees and task forces has been exemplary, especially his chairmanship of the Administration and Budget Committee and participation in the Every Student Succeeds Act task force. And whereas Joe has been a consistent voice for the continued improvement of all schools based on equity of funding and opportunities. Now therefore be it resolved that the District of Columbia State Board of Education honors Ward 6 Representative Joe Weedon on the 19th day of December in the year 2018 for his outstanding service and leadership to the District of Columbia.
It's getting late. Thank you. I'd like to begin with offering the departing members the chance to say a few words. Laura?
Yeah, I'll go first. And we were talking about how the left side of the state board is going to be gone. I've prepared remarks for this moment because this is an important moment for me. Ever since I was in high school, I wanted to run for and serve an elected office. I got the bug when I ran for Secretary of Student Council in 8th grade. And the thrill and the ambition of doing that stuck with me ever since then. And so now I've done it. And this final, and I'm done with that. And this final meeting tonight serves as a moment, a marker for me to reflect on what these 4 years have been. In some cases, reaffirming beliefs I came in with, and in some ways, deepening and changing them. And I'll share a moment that I had while I was campaigning, going back 4 years. and I was giving a speech to a set of constituents, and I talked about a marathon that I had taken part in. It would not be correct to say I'd run the whole marathon. I actually joined a friend toward the end of the marathon. She asked me to jump in. So I did at mile 16. Now, I'm a 3-mile runner, and so I intended to jump right back out at mile 19. But instead, I was surrounded by these crowds of people cheering me on, and it was totally amazing and transforming. And before I knew it, I was at mile 25, and she was like, I really want to finish this on my own. So I left the marathon after having run 9 miles and actually not even feeling that tired. And the analogy for why this is relevant today is not because the 4 years has felt like 9 long miles, but it hasn't. But that my vision at that moment that still stands today is that we as members of this DC community need to be the people lining the streets for our students so that they can run the 9 miles when they thought they could only run 3. And it's really much more important we do that than line the streets for people running a marathon. This is about our students and their future. This weekend, I spent some time Christmas shopping with a mother, I'll just call her Maya for now, who's experienced very significant trauma in her life beyond what I could ever imagine going through, and she's going through another rough patch right now. Her preferred language is Spanish. She has a daughter the same age as mine, and I've learned so much from her that I pass on to my daughters. And this is the story of how I've changed. We share information with one another, and it's so often that our society believes that she doesn't have something to teach me, but that I only have something to teach her. And in this particular moment, it was that she wanted me to teach her something. She asked me to show her what games I was picking out for my kids, which is super fun, right? So I'm showing her, this word game is so interesting because you can play around with the letters, and these logic games really push my kids to critically think, and these math games, they're incredibly fun. We sit down, we play them together, and I looked at her face, and I realized these were games she couldn't play with her kids. First of all, the instructions are in English, and they're even hard for me to understand. If you have kids and you know these board games, you can't really understand initially how you have to play them. You have to really dig in, and it has to be your first language. The second thing I realized is that her own formal education had limited her capacity to think critically in the way that would have encouraged her daughters the way I was encouraging my daughters day to day. And the reality is that our educational system and our financial system rewards my kind of knowledge. And I share with my kids that kind of knowledge, and they get higher salaries later in life. So when we talk about equity, we're usually talking about leveling those test score differences so that families can earn better income later in life, live a life of dignity where they won't be discriminated against because of their skin color, and feel included and loved. And the example I just gave shows that access isn't just about giving a tool or information, or in this case, a game. It's about actually sitting down, showing how it works, spending time together, learning from each other, validating each other's humanity. The reason I'm sharing this story now with this policy approval body is because this board is often in a position to consider how policies will move the needle when widening access to opportunity for all students. We invest a lot of time in digital tools, like the citywide report card. And while these tools do make information available, they don't necessarily make it more accessible to the families furthest from opportunity. And if we as a system truly want to address inequity, these tools must be accompanied by real human beings, and that is what we just heard about today. These are human beings who build trusting relationships, who spend time with families who've been marginalized by our systems that I have been part of creating. These are people who seek to learn from them, to grow because of them, to show our own humanity. And this is not a ratio of 100 to 1 or 50 to 1. As a system, we severely underinvest in relationships, and I am one of the most guilty people of doing this. We think of them as soft, not leading to results, when in reality, they're an enabler of everything else that matters. Everything we're trying to create matters because of relationships. And all of these tools we're trying to create cannot achieve their potential without relationships. So I share this more emotionally than I thought I would tonight, that my biggest lesson of 4 years is we have to invest in relationships that bridge difference if we want to seriously move the needle on equity. We don't always need more or a different policy or another framework. And when we do change policy, because we think it's going to help, it has to be accompanied by human support, and we, as elected officials, must demand it. We need to encourage this system to build that team of supporters like those I experienced in the marathon, lining the halls of our schools, connecting home and school, shouting their support for our students that they can go beyond what they ever thought they could do. It has been a privilege, truly, to learn these lessons over the past 4 years, and I thank Ward 1 residents for believing in me to represent them and their interests. And I would be completely remiss not to thank my husband, who has supported this dream of mine from day one. When I suggested it, he said, "Will you just run already?" and provided the loving care to our daughters for over 100 Wednesday nights, and then some, so that I could give all of me to this work. Thank you.
Well, first I want to thank Laura for reminding us of our true purpose of becoming board members. Secondly, I'd like to thank my family for allowing me to serve. My wife, Lisa, my daughters, Jada and Rachel, who started their education journey in our DC public schools at Brookland Elementary and Bunker Hill Elementary, respectively. I'd like to thank the residents of Ward 5 for electing me 3 times and allowing me to serve. It's been a privilege. I'd like to thank one of the persons still in the chamber, and that's Faith. Faith and I started this journey long before she was the student advocate and before she was the president of the Ward 5 Council on Education. And she's been a supporter of mine, good and bad. And we've had many conversations, sometimes late at night, and I'd like to thank her husband and family for sometimes allowing her to have those long conversations with me. And I'd like to thank my colleagues on the board. I believe I've been blessed with having the opportunity to serve with some of the most incredibly smart people. And rarely in our lives do we get an opportunity to work with so many people from different backgrounds, and we all come together and work for one cause. It's been a pleasure, even through the challenges. This board, when I started, we had an executive director, 1 staff person, and a borrowed FTE. And our current executive director, John Paul, reminded me, I asked him earlier, how many FTEs do we have now total? And it's 13, including the ombudsman and the student advocate. So we have grown significantly. And I want to say I've watched many board members grow. And learn to understand one another. I've developed good relationships with a number of board members. And I'm going to point out Jack Jacobson, because there were times we had very heated discussions. But I believe those discussions were not personal discussions. I never personally hated him. I don't believe he personally hated me. But we did have very heated discussions, and I recall one that was very heated. And at the end of it, we both said, okay, well, that's it. Now let's just move forward. And we did that, and I believe our relationship improved, not only as board members, but as friends. And lastly, I want to thank my council members. I had two that were incredibly strong supporters of me in this position. And so having said that, it's been fun, but my journey is not over as far as supporting education and the outcomes in this city. But before I close, I did say I was going to be brief, didn't I? But I'll try to close now, if you don't mind. I could take a lesson from the mayor of Philadelphia, John Street, where he said, I'm going to be brief no matter how long it takes. But I'm not going to do that. But again, I just want to say to Laura, thank you again for reminding us of why we're here. I was just so moved by her remarks and her passion, and so, which is also rarely seen by her, but I appreciate it, and that shows that she is truly committed to our citizens in this city. I'm going to miss you all.
I'm not sure how I follow all of this. Unlike Laura, I never thought I'd run for office. It's not something I ever thought I would want to do or would do, but the past 4 years representing my friends, my family, all of Ward 6 has been truly an honor. The most rewarding thing has been seeing my children and their friends and so many kids across our neighborhood, our community, speak out to right the wrongs that they see, to advocate for what they believe is right, to raise the standards, raise the bar for all kids. I think as adults, we often try to make excuses, and we don't look and challenge our students enough. I want to echo Mark's comments and thank my colleagues on the board and the state board staff for the work you've done over the past 4 years and much longer to support our students. It's an honor to work with each of you. I believe it's the board's responsibility to serve as the voice of parents and students in our system and to hold our city accountable for delivering on the promise of a high-quality education for all. Through our work, I've always tried to put the perspective that I bring as a parent to our work and ensure that we're highlighting the fact and the voice of students in our work. I think in some ways, as a city, we've failed. We've looked at the rhetoric and we haven't dug deep enough to truly understand the impact of our policy decisions on our students. We've put test scores ahead of the other things, the learning, the happiness. I think this was most recently highlighted last week by NBC News, where they documented that several of our middle schools are not providing science and social studies for our students, meeting all the standards. I hope the board will continue to dive deep into that and hold our city accountable for delivering on the promise that we make to our students that we will provide them a great, well-rounded education, regardless of where they live or what school they attend. We've done tremendous work on a number of things, residency, attendance, but as we saw tonight, and as I saw last night at Eastern's LSAT meeting, we haven't done enough. We still have work to do to make sure the residency regulations are working. We still have work to do to make sure that we're implementing attendance requirements, not just as the law requires, but as it works to prepare our students for success beyond high school. Showing up for the last 2 minutes of class should not check a box so a student can graduate. We must do more. We must do better. I'll close just simply by saying thank you to Amy, Malia, William, their constant encouragement and understanding to force me to stand up and to advocate for what I believe and what the Ward 6 community believes has been just beyond what I could have ever expected, and I owe them a tremendous debt of thanks. I'll continue to be around. I'm a parent, and I will continue to put the voice of students and our community first, and I look forward to continuing to work with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you all. Okay, I'm emotional, but the motion is on approval of ceremonial resolution 1813, 1814, and 1815. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Thank Well, yeah, you might.
I just want to say, I came in with the class of Laura and Joe, and I can still remember at the very beginning, the three of us trying to figure out what this was and what we could do and the conversations we had. And I remember just really terrific and fascinating conversations with Laura, provocative. I learned so much about where she was coming from, and I so appreciate it. With Joe in these years, we've just found so much to work together on, and I have really, really appreciated it. And I'm going to miss it very much, as I will the conversations with Laura. And I just want to say about Mark, who just brought such institutional knowledge, taught me and others so much about the board, so much about DC. I just can't say enough about how much I've learned and how much I appreciate the time that you spent with me and how much I'll miss you, and I hope to continue working with you.
Markus?
Just very quickly, one, thank all of you for your service. Obviously, to Mark, I think Ruth captured it perfectly. You've, as the dean of our board, you've been the institutional knowledge, and on my 2 years on the board have given me more sage advice than I can thank you for. And so I appreciate your mentorship and for encouraging me to be courageous on behalf of the students that we all represent. To Laura, thank you. You've been my cheerleader along the marathon route, and saw it not robbery to really get me involved deeply in the work of this board very early on in my tenure, and taught me a lot about what this role means and what it can do from a policy-making perspective, and I thank you for that. And obviously, I'll continue to make sure that the thoughtful recommendations that came out of the task force that you asked me to co-chair with you, which I thank you for, get back to us and really impact all the students and families that we worked 8 months plus on behalf of. And Joe, obviously, I think like you did in your closing remarks, you've always pushed this board to do more. And brought a unique perspective as a neighborhood school parent, as a public school parent, that was invaluable to our discussions. And I know that all of you will encourage us from beyond this dais to do more and to really complete the work that's left unfinished. So thank you all for your service and for all you've done for me and all of us. Thank you.
Well, since we're making comments, I was going to wait and mention it to each of you individually, but thank you very much for serving our city, and I truly have enjoyed working with all of you, and while Lord knows we have not seen eye to eye on every issue, I want to thank you for your advice, your support, your leadership, your mentorship in several ways, and really challenging my own as well as other board members, their thought process surrounding issues over the past 2 years that I've served on the board. I hope to be able to continue to work with you in your wards as parents and community members, and just please know that you will be missed. Your service has been definitely recognized, and please continue to reach out. Thank you.
I'll be brief.
However long it takes.
I feel like I get so much more out of this board than I put into it. I work a lot of hours. I go to a lot of community meetings. I take great pride in my service, as all of you do. But to me, the relationships that I've made with colleagues on this board are something that is a gift that I will cherish throughout my life. And I include all three of you in that, and as part of that gift. And I can't thank the residents of Ward 2 enough for allowing me this privilege. Joe, your advocacy for your ward is unmatched, and you are never content. And that's a very good thing in public service, to never become content with where things are and with the status quo. And I hope to bring that challenge from you with me as I continue my 2 years of service remaining. Laura, you are one of the most brilliant people I've worked with in my entire life, on this issue or any other, and you cannot be replaced on this body, and your perspective and the thought process you bring to problem solving is unmatched, and I will continue to be your friend just to see where else your life takes you, because it will be very, very far. And Mark, as you alluded to, I thought I was hot stuff. And working with you, I've learned patience, I've learned thoughtfulness, and I am positive you cleaned up a mess or two for me behind the scenes, and for that I will always be thankful. You have always approached debate with a gentlemanly nature and with thoughtfulness for the future, and I will strive to emulate that in my remaining service. Thank you, Mark.
Last but not least, I hope. Not least, anyway. Service on the board has been, my experience on the board has been extremely interesting, and started at a place before the two of you came. But I wouldn't be here if it hadn't been for Mark. Because Mark was here. Mark held this organization together. Mark fought for our independence. But when he did that, when we got our independence, he made a mess for mine. So, because we lost everything. We lost our staff, we lost our budget, and I lost my job because I could not fulfill the responsibilities to try to work with Mark to build the board back up without giving up my basic income. So, Mark, you owe me a lot of money. But you also were always there when I needed you. I always felt free to call you and have some conversations, and we did have a little trouble there when okay. But we worked through that, and I think it worked out best for the board in a lot of ways. But I really want to thank all of you all. I'm keeping your numbers in my phone, and I will feel free to call any of you at any time, in any place, because I not only do I consider you great board members, I consider you friends now. And I like to keep that relationship going. If you don't mind, it's a problem now. All right. Thank you. All right.
Madam President.
Yes.
Through the President, I have a question for John Paul. May we take our green folders home?
Okay.
Motion to adjourn.
So did we approve? We did that? Okay. So the motion is unanimous. But one final thing before I adjourn this meeting. I'd like to say goodbye to our fellow Brian Robinson. Could you stand up? This is his last night here. Thank you so much for your service. You have been an asset to the office. We will miss you. Thank you.
Oh, and thanks for the cookies.
Oh, Matt, thank you for the cookies.
They were excellent.
Yeah. All right. So, with no further business before the state board, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The meeting is adjourned at 8:48. I told you it was going to be a long meeting.